Blood on the marble floor. Tonight, a poor maid will wipe blood from the floor of a mafia boss's mansion. Little does she know that seeing his face will change her destiny forever. This is a story of love born from the shadows, where power, manipulation, and obsession intertwine in a dangerous, inescapable relationship. Follow this story to the very end. Don't forget to like and comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story has traveled the world. Rain didn't just fall on the Moretti estate that night. It attacked. Fat drops hammered the black marble exterior like bullets, turning the manicured gardens into a soup of mud and torn petals. Lightning cracked the sky open every few seconds, throwing harsh white light through the tall windows, illuminating the kind of wealth most people only saw in magazines. Inside the east wing, water dripped from an ornate chandelier where the roof had started to leak, each drop hitting the Persian rug below with a steady, maddening rhythm. Celine Vale didn't notice the leak. She was too busy scrubbing blood off the dining room floor. Her knees ached against the cold marble. The bleach burned her nostrils, mixing with the lingering stench of cigar smoke and something metallic she tried not to think about. Her hands, red and raw from hours of cleaning, moved the brush in tight circles, working the stain deeper into the grout before lifting it away. She'd learned that trick from Maria, the head housekeeper: bleach first, then enzyme cleaner, then one more round of bleach. The Morettis paid well, but they expected perfection, especially when it came to making evidence disappear. This was the third time tonight she'd cleaned this room. The first time, around 9, she'd swept up broken glass from what looked like a dinner gone wrong. Plates smashed against the wall, wine soaking into the curtains. Rich people drama. Nothing unusual. The second time, near midnight, she'd wiped down the table and chairs, cleared away abandoned bottles of whiskey that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Still normal. Still safe. But this time she'd found the blood. A pool of it, dark and viscous, spreading from beneath the serving cart near the window. Not a lot. Not enough to suggest a body, thank God. But enough to make her hands shake as she filled her bucket with fresh water and tried very hard not to imagine what had happened after she'd left at midnight. Thunder exploded overhead, and Celine flinched, nearly knocking over the bleach bottle. She caught it just in time, heart hammering. Get it together. Just finish the job and get out. Her mother's medication cost $800 a month, and the pharmacy didn't accept excuses. She needed this job, needed the Moretti's money, even if it meant cleaning up after their violence. She was so focused on the stain that she didn't hear the door open behind her. "You're thorough." Celine's entire body went rigid. The voice was male, quiet, and close enough that he must have been watching her for at least a minute. Her mind raced through possibilities. One of the security guards maybe, or Paolo, the driver who sometimes worked nights. She kept scrubbing, kept her head down. Invisible girls survived. That's what her mother always said. When you're working in a house like this, you become furniture. You don't see, don't hear, don't exist. Most people would have missed that spot behind the cart leg, the voice continued. Closer now. She could smell expensive cologne cutting through the bleach. But you moved the whole thing. Smart. Not Paolo. Not any of the guards. She knew all their voices by now. This was someone else. Her stomach dropped as she heard the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. The metallic click seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room, louder even than the thunder outside. Look at me. It wasn't a request. Celine's hand stilled on the brush. She wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to drop everything and bolt for the service entrance, to disappear into the storm and never come back. But her legs wouldn't move. Fear had nailed her to the floor as surely as if she'd been chained there. Slowly, with the careful movements of someone trying not to spook a predator, she turned her head. Cassian Moretti stood 15 feet away, leaning against the doorframe with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never been told no in his entire life. He couldn't have been more than 30, but he carried himself with the kind of authority that made age irrelevant. Dark hair, still damp from rain or a shower, curled slightly at his temples. His white dress shirt was rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms marked with faint scars, and his sleeves. His cuffs were stained red. The gun hung loose in his right hand, not aimed at her, but not exactly pointed away either. He studied her with eyes the color of winter steel, cold and assessing, The way someone might examine a bug they were deciding whether to crush or keep. Celine had seen him before, of course. You couldn't work in the Moretti estate without knowing what the prince of the family looked like. She'd glimpsed him in hallways, heard his voice through closed doors, once stood frozen in a supply closet while he passed by close enough to touch. But she'd never been this close. Never had his full attention fixed on her like a spotlight. He was younger than she expected, beautiful in the way poisonous things were beautiful. Sharp cheekbones, full mouth, and those eyes that seemed to see straight through skin to whatever ugly truths people tried to hide. "You've cleaned this room 3 times tonight," Cassian said, pushing off the doorframe and walking toward her with slow, measured steps. Each footfall echoed in the huge space. "The staff schedule says you were supposed to finish at midnight. It's almost 3 in the morning." Celine's mouth had gone completely dry. She tried to swallow and couldn't. The room wasn't clean." "No." He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "It wasn't. And yet Maria would have signed off on it. Rosa would have signed off on it. Hell, most of my guards wouldn't have noticed that blood if it bit them." His head tilted slightly. "But you came back 3 times. Why?" "Because I need this job. Because my mother's cancer is eating through our savings faster than I can earn it back. Because if I get fired for doing sloppy work, no other family in New York will hire me." But she couldn't say any of that. Not to him. "I was taught to do things right," she said quietly, forcing her voice steady. "If a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well." Something flickered in his expression. Interest, maybe, or amusement. He crouched down beside her bucket of pink-tinged water, gun still dangling from his fingers, and dipped one finger into it. Brought it to his nose. "Hospital-grade bleach. The expensive kind. You bought this yourself, didn't you? The estate stock's the cheap stuff." She had. $20 at a medical supply store, money she couldn't afford to spend. But the cheap bleach left residue, and residue meant questions. And questions meant... "Most people would have run," Cassian said, standing again. "After hearing a body hit the floor. After hearing the gunshot. After smelling the blood." His eyes never left her face. "Most people don't have the stomach for this kind of work. But you came back 3 times. Celine's hands were shaking so badly now that she had to clasp them in her lap to hide it. "I didn't hear anything. Don't lie to me." His voice didn't rise, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I respect the thoroughness. Don't ruin it with bullshit." She swallowed hard, tasting copper. Outside, the storm intensified, rain lashing the windows hard enough to rattle the frames. The chandelier overhead swayed slightly, crystal prisms chiming against each other like wind chimes. "Most people don't need money for chemotherapy," she said finally, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Silence. Long enough that she thought maybe she'd miscalculated. Maybe admitting weakness to a man like Cassian Moretti was the last mistake she'd ever make. Her eyes dropped to the gun in his hand, watching his finger rest against the trigger guard. Not on the trigger. Not yet. When she finally dared to look back at his face, something had changed. The cold assessment had shifted into something darker, hungrier. "Your mother," he said. Not a question. Celine nodded, not trusting her voice. "What kind?" "Pancreatic, stage 3. Her voice cracked, and she hated herself for it, hated showing vulnerability to this man who probably saw emotion as blood in the water. "She starts a new trial treatment next month. If I can keep up with the payments." Cassian stared at her for a long moment, and she couldn't read his expression at all. Then he did something she didn't expect. He holstered the gun in the back of his waistband and held out his hand. "Get up." She stared at his outstretched palm, calloused and scarred, dried blood still visible under his nails. This was the hand that had fired the gun tonight, the hand that had probably killed dozens, maybe hundreds. She'd be insane to touch it, but she took it anyway. His grip was firm, warm despite the cold air, and he pulled her to her feet with no effort at all. She stumbled slightly, legs stiff from kneeling, and his other hand shot out to steady her elbow. The touch lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it left her skin burning. "What's your name?" he asked. "Celine. Celine Vale." "How long have you worked here, Celine?" 6 months? "And in 6 months, how many times have you seen something you shouldn't have?" The honest answer was at least a dozen. Bruised knuckles. bloodstained clothing, hushed conversations that stopped the moment she entered a room. Once, a man crying in the garden at dawn, and when she'd come back to clean that area an hour later, there'd been nothing but disturbed dirt and the lingering smell of gasoline. "I don't see anything," she said carefully. "I clean, that's all." A smile ghosted across his mouth, there and gone so fast she almost missed it. Smart girl. He turned and walked toward the window, hands clasped behind his back, as he stared out at the storm-ravaged gardens. Lightning illuminated his profile, strong nose, sharp jaw, the kind of face that belonged on Roman coins or Renaissance paintings, power and brutality carved into flesh. "You know what I do, Celine?" She knew better than to answer that honestly. "I know you're Cassian Moretti," she said instead. "I know this is your family's home. That's all I need to know." "No." He glanced back at her, and there was something almost amused in his expression now. "You know more than that. You're not stupid. You've seen the cars that come and go at odd hours, the men with guns, the way politicians and judges show up for dinner parties and leave with envelopes." He turned fully now, leaning back against the windowsill. "You know exactly what I do. You just know better than to say it out loud." Thunder rattled the windows again. The chandelier's dripping had gotten worse, a small puddle forming on the rug beneath it. "I'm going to make you an offer," Cassian said, "and I want you to think very carefully before you answer." Every muscle in Celine's body tensed. This was it. Whatever happened next would determine whether she walked out of this room or got buried in the rose garden like that crying man. "Your mother's treatment," he continued. "How much does it cost? Total. Everything. The chemo, the trial medications, hospital stays, all of it." She couldn't think, couldn't process why he was asking. "Close to 200,000 over the next year. Maybe more if the trial doesn't work." "And how much have you saved?" 15,000. "I've been working 3 jobs for the past 8 months. He nodded as if she'd confirmed something he already knew. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to pay for your mother's treatment. All of it. The trial, the medications, private rooms at Mount Sinai, the best oncologist in the state. She'll get whatever she needs, no questions asked." Celine's heart stopped. "What?" "You heard me." "Why would you—" The words caught in her throat. Nothing was free, especially not from men like him. "What do you want from me?" His eyes locked onto hers, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. "I want you close." The rain hammered harder. Water had started seeping under the window frame, darkening the wood. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Yes, you do." He pushed off the windowsill and closed the distance between them in 3 strides. He didn't touch her, but he stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his body. "I want you here, in this house, not as a maid anymore, as—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Someone I trust. You don't know me. I know you came back 3 times to clean blood off my floor. I know you work yourself to exhaustion for someone you love. I know you're smart enough to be scared, but brave enough to show up anyway." His voice dropped lower. "That's more than I can say for most people in my life." This was insane. Insane and dangerous, and she should absolutely refuse, should grab her bucket and walk out of this house and never look back. Her mother would understand. They'd find another way. "She has 6 months," Celine heard herself say. "Without the trial treatment. The doctor said 6 months, maybe less." Cassian's expression didn't change. "Then I suggest you decide quickly." "What exactly would I be doing if I said yes?" "Whatever I need you to do." He turned and walked back to the doorway, pausing with his hand on the frame. "I have a lot of enemies, Celine, people who'd love to see me dead or destroyed. I need people around me I can trust, people who understand the value of discretion, people who—" He looked back at her. "People who know how to clean up blood and not ask questions." Her stomach turned. "You want me to help you cover up murders? I want you to survive in my world without becoming a liability. There's a difference. I'm not a criminal. Not yet." The words hung in the air like a threat and a promise. "But everyone who stays close to me long enough becomes one. It's inevitable. The question is whether you're willing to become a criminal if it means your mother lives." The chandelier chose that moment to give up completely. The leak widened into a stream, and suddenly water was pouring through the ceiling, flooding the expensive rug, drowning out the sound of rain outside. Celine jumped back instinctively, but Cassian didn't move, didn't even flinch as water soaked his hair and shoulders. "Clock's ticking," he said over the rush of water. "Your mother's appointment is in 6 days. I can have her transferred to Mount Sinai tomorrow. Private suite, best care available. Or you can walk out right now, and I'll forget this conversation ever happened." His eyes glittered in the dim light. "Choose." Celine looked down at her hands. Red. Raw. Stained with bleach and someone else's blood. She thought about her mother in that tiny apartment. So weak now she couldn't even walk to the bathroom without help. Thought about the pharmacy bills stacked on their kitchen counter. The eviction notice that had arrived last week. The way her mother had smiled when Celine told her about the trial treatment, the first real hope they'd had in months. She thought about becoming the kind of person who enabled violence, who cleaned crime scenes and kept secrets that could destroy lives, who stood beside a monster and called it survival. And then she thought about her mother's body in a cheap casket because Celine had been too moral to accept help from the devil. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "I need it in writing, a contract, legal, ironclad. You pay for everything, and if something happens to you, the payments don't stop." Something blazed in Cassian's eyes. Respect, maybe. Or something more dangerous. "Done. And I want to see her. Every day. No matter what you need from me, I get to visit my mother every single day. Done. And if I..." She forced herself to say it. "If I ever want out, I walk away. No retaliation. No threats." His smile was slow and sharp enough to cut. "We both know that's not going to happen, Celine. Once you step into my world, you don't step out. Not alive." He tilted his head. "But sure. I'll put it in the contract if it makes you feel better." The water from the ceiling had spread across half the room now, soaking into the grout she'd spent hours cleaning. All that work, ruined. Somehow that felt symbolic. "I need 24 hours, she said, "to think about it." "You have until sunrise." He checked his watch. "That gives you 3 hours. My lawyer will have the contracts ready. If you agree, you sign them, and your mother gets transferred tomorrow morning. If you refuse," he shrugged, "you go back to scrubbing floors and watching her die slowly." "That's not enough time." It's more than most people get." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Celine, if you tell anyone about this conversation, I'll know. And contracts won't protect your mother then. Are we clear?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good." He disappeared into the dark hallway, his footsteps swallowed by the storm. Celine stood alone in the flooding room, surrounded by evidence of wealth and violence, and realized she'd just made a deal with the kind of man mothers warned their daughters about, the kind who ruined lives for sport, the kind who saw people as possessions, the kind who, once he decided he wanted something, would burn down the entire world to keep it. Damashit. The next 3 hours were the longest of Celine's life. She went through the motions, finished cleaning the dining room as best she could with water still pouring from the ceiling, collected her supplies, logged out with the night supervisor who barely looked up from his phone. Outside, the storm had gentled into a steady rain. She walked to the bus stop with her coat pulled tight, mind spinning. She should run, pack what little she owned, grab her mother, and disappear into some other city where the Moretti name meant nothing. Canada, maybe. Or somewhere in the Midwest where organized crime was just something you read about in newspapers. But even as she thought it, she knew it was impossible. They had no money, no resources. Her mother couldn't travel in her condition. And even if they managed to escape, how long before the cancer won anyway? The bus was nearly empty at this hour. She sat in the back watching the city blur past rain-streaked windows. New York looked different at 4 a.m, exhausted and mean, all the glamour stripped away to show the concrete bones underneath. She passed the hospital where her mother had her treatments, the pharmacy where they'd begged for payment extensions, the pawn shop where she'd sold her grandmother's ring. 3 years ago, she'd been a different person. 19 years old, community college student, dreams of becoming a graphic designer. She'd had friends, a boyfriend, a future that looked bright and open. Then her father died. Sudden heart attack, no warning. And 6 months later, her mother got the diagnosis. Everything else fell away. College, friends, dreams. There was only the endless cycle of work and worry and watching someone you love disappear piece by piece. The boyfriend had left after 3 months, said he couldn't handle the depression, the constant stress. She didn't blame him. She could barely handle it herself. Now she was 22, felt 40, and was seriously considering becoming a criminal's, assistant? Accomplice? She didn't even know what Cassian wanted from her, not really. He'd been deliberately vague, which scared her more than if he'd been explicit. The bus dropped her off 6 blocks from her apartment. She walked through rain that had gentled to mist, past closed bodegas and homeless men sleeping in doorways. Her building was the kind of place landlords forgot about. Cracked stairs, broken buzzer, the smell of garbage and old cooking oil in the hallway. She climbed to the 3rd floor and let herself in quietly, careful not to wake her mother. The apartment was tiny. 1 bedroom that her mother used, a couch in the living room where Celine slept, a kitchen the size of a closet. Medical equipment crowded every surface. Pill bottles, oxygen tank, the portable IV stand the visiting nurse had brought last week. It smelled like sickness and disinfectant, that particular scent that meant someone was dying slowly. Celine stood in the doorway of her mother's room, watching her sleep. Even in the dim light from the street lamps outside, she could see how much weight her mother had lost. She looked like a stranger wearing her mother's face. Hollow cheeks, paper-thin skin, the kind of fragility that made you afraid to touch her. Catherine Vale had been beautiful once. Celine had seen the photos, a woman with bright eyes and an easy smile, someone who laughed loud and loved hard. Cancer had stolen all of that, carved her down to this ghost. Baby? Her mother's eyes fluttered open. What time is it? Early. Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. Can't sleep anyway. Catherine tried to sit up, and Celine rushed to help, adjusting the pillows behind her. How was work? Fine. Same as always. You look tired. I'm okay. You're always okay. Her mother's hand found hers, squeeze weak but determined. You don't have to be strong all the time, Celine. It's okay to be scared. Celine felt something crack in her chest. She sat on the edge of the bed, still holding her mother's hand, and tried to remember the last time she'd let herself cry. Months ago, probably. Maybe longer. Crying felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Mom, she said quietly, if there was a way to save you, a way that meant I had to do something bad, would you want me to do it? Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a siren wailed past, the sound fading into the city's constant hum. Define bad, her mother said finally. I don't know exactly, but working for someone dangerous, someone who does terrible things. The Morettis? Celine's head snapped up. How did you? I'm dying, not stupid. Catherine smiled weakly. I've heard the stories. Everyone in this city knows what that family is. And I've seen the way you come home sometimes, scared, shaky. You think I don't notice? I tried to be careful. You've always been careful. Too careful. Her mother squeezed her hand again. Listen to me. Whatever they're offering you, whatever they want in return, the answer is no. You understand? I won't let you destroy your life for me. You're my mother, and you're my daughter, which means I'd rather die tomorrow than watch you become someone you hate. Catherine's eyes were fierce despite the exhaustion. Promise me. Promise me you'll walk away from whatever this is. Celine wanted to promise, wanted to be the good daughter who honored her mother's wishes, who chose morality over survival. But she couldn't make the words come out, because what Catherine didn't understand, what she couldn't understand, was that Celine had already been destroyed. 3 years of watching her mother suffer had carved out everything soft and hopeful and left only the raw, desperate need to make it stop. She wasn't choosing between good and evil anymore. She was choosing between one kind of death and another. Okay, she lied. Okay, Mom. I promise. Catherine relaxed back into the pillows, eyes already drifting closed again. Good girl. We'll figure something out. We always do. But they wouldn't. They both knew it. Celine sat there until her mother's breathing evened out into sleep, then moved to the living room and collapsed on the couch. The apartment's clock ticked toward dawn. She had maybe 2 hours before she had to decide. She pulled out her phone and stared at it. No messages, no missed calls. The only number that mattered was disconnected, the trial coordinator at Mount Sinai, who'd left her a voicemail last week explaining they'd exceeded their patient capacity and couldn't accept her mother after all. Another dead end. Another door slammed shut. Celine set the phone down and buried her face in her hands. The truth was, she'd already decided. Maybe she'd decided the moment Cassian made the offer. Or maybe she'd decided years ago, when her father died and left them with nothing, and she'd learned that the world didn't care about fairness or deserve. The world cared about power and money and who you knew. And now she knew Cassian Moretti. At 6:30, just as gray light started seeping through the windows, Celine stood, smoothed her hair, and changed into clean clothes. She kissed her sleeping mother's forehead, whispered an apology for a promise she was about to break, and walked out into the morning. She didn't go to the bus stop. Instead, she found a payphone, one of the few left in the city, and dialed the number Cassian had slipped into her pocket before she left the estate. She didn't remember him doing it, but of course he had. Men like him thought 10 steps ahead. He answered on the second ring. "I was starting to think you'd run." "I want the contract in person," Celine said. "Your lawyer brings it to me. I read every word before I sign." "Done. Where are you?" She gave him the address of a diner 3 blocks away. Neutral ground. Public. 1 hour. 30 minutes. He hung up. Celine walked to the diner in a daze. The city was waking up around her. Trucks making deliveries, early commuters rushing to subway stations, the smell of coffee and car exhaust mixing in the humid air. Everything looked normal. The world hadn't ended just because she'd made a deal with a devil. The diner was one of those old-school places with red vinyl booths and a counter where cops sat drinking burned coffee. She ordered tea she didn't want and sat in the back corner watching the door. 23 minutes later, a man in an expensive suit walked in. He looked around once, spotted her, and came over. Mid-50s, gray at the temples, the kind of face that suggested he'd seen everything and been surprised by none of it. "Miss Vale?" He sat down across from her without waiting for permission. "I'm Richard Keller, Mr. Moretti's attorney. These are for you." He slid a manila folder across the table. Celine opened it with shaking hands. Inside were 3 contracts, each one thick enough to be a novella. She started reading. The first contract outlined her new employment. She'd be a personal consultant to the Moretti family, with a salary that made her dizzy. $200,000 a year, plus housing, plus expenses. Her duties were listed vaguely. Administrative support, strategic consultation, and other tasks as assigned by Cassian Moretti. Which could mean anything, which probably meant everything. The second contract detailed her mother's medical care. Complete coverage, no caps, best doctors available. The language was so thorough it was almost kind. Every possible scenario covered, every contingency planned for. If the trial failed, they'd try another. If Mount Sinai couldn't help, they'd fly her mother to Mayo Clinic, to Johns Hopkins, to experimental clinics in Europe, whatever it took. The third contract was the one that made her stomach turn. It was a non-disclosure agreement so comprehensive it essentially rendered her mute about anything Moretti-related for the rest of her life. She couldn't talk to police, couldn't testify in court, couldn't write a memoir, or give an interview, or even drunk text a friend about what she saw. Violation meant immediate termination of all contracts, including her mother's medical care, plus criminal penalties for breach of confidentiality. And at the bottom of each page, a line for her signature. "Questions?" Keller asked. "What happens if he dies?" Celine asked. "If something happens to Cassian?" "The contract's transferred to his next of kin. Your mother's care continues regardless." "And if I want out?" Keller's expression didn't change. "There's a termination clause on page 47 of the employment contract. You can resign with 90 days' notice, provided you haven't witnessed any activities that would constitute," he paused delicately, "liability for the family." "And if I have?" "Then the resignation requires mutual agreement from both parties," which meant never. Once she saw something criminal, she was trapped forever, a prisoner in a gilded cage. Celine looked down at the contracts. 3 signatures, and her mother would live. 3 signatures, and Celine Vale would cease to exist as anything but an extension of Cassian Moretti's will. She thought about her mother's face, so thin and tired, thought about the pharmacy bills, the eviction notice, the slow, grinding horror of watching someone die when you were powerless to stop it. Then she thought about the blood on Cassian's cuffs, the gun in his hand, the cold certainty in his eyes when he'd said, "Everyone who stays close to me becomes a criminal." Keller produced a pen and set it on the table between them. "Take your time." But there was no time. There never had been. Celine picked up the pen and signed. Her handwriting looked strange on the page, small and cramped, nothing like the confident signature she'd once practiced in high school. This signature looked scared. It looked like a girl who knew she was stepping off a cliff and hoping something would catch her before she hit bottom. Keller collected the contracts efficiently, slipped them back into the folder, and stood. "A car will pick you up at your apartment at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Pack whatever you need. You'll be moving into the estate." "Wait, what?" "Part of your employment. You'll have your own suite in the West Wing, private entrance, private bath, fully furnished. Your mother will be transferred to Mount Sinai this afternoon." He pulled out a business card and set it on the table. "My number. Call if you need anything. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow." He left before she could respond. Celine sat alone in the diner booth, staring at the business card. The tea had gone cold. Outside, the morning rush was in full swing, people hurrying to jobs, to lives, to futures they'd chosen freely. Normal people. People who hadn't just sold themselves to a criminal empire. She wanted to cry, wanted to scream, wanted to run out into traffic and let the universe decide whether she lived or died. Instead, she finished her cold tea, left money on the table, and walked home to tell her mother the good news about Mount Sinai. She left out the part about the blood, and the contracts, and the fact that she now belonged to Cassian Moretti as surely as if he'd carved his name into her skin. Some truths were better left buried, at least until they clawed their way to the surface anyway. Must. Her mother cried when the ambulance came to transfer her to Mount Sinai. Happy tears, for once. The EMTs were gentle, professional, treating Catherine like she mattered instead of just another dying woman they'd forget by lunch. Celine rode in the ambulance holding her mother's hand, watching the city blur past through the small window. Mount Sinai was a different universe from the clinic where they'd been going. Everything was clean, quiet, efficient. No peeling paint, no 6-hour waits in plastic chairs. A doctor met them at the entrance, an actual oncologist, not a tired resident, and explained the treatment plan in terms that suggested he had all the time in the world. Her mother was settled into a private room that looked more like a hotel than a hospital. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, a window overlooking the park. Catherine fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the transfer, and Celine sat beside her watching her breathe. She'd done the right thing. She had to believe that. Whatever came next, whatever Cassian asked of her, it couldn't be worse than watching her mother die on that couch. At 9:30 that evening, Celine's phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Tomorrow morning," Cassian's voice said without preamble. "The car will be there at 10. Don't be late." "I need more time. You have until 10 o'clock. Pack light. Everything else will be provided." He paused. "How's your mother?" The question surprised her. "Sleeping. They're starting the first round of treatment tomorrow." "Good." Another pause. "Celine." "Yeah?" "I keep my promises. Remember that." He hung up. She stared at her phone, trying to decipher what he'd meant. Reassurance? Threat? With Cassian, it was probably both. That night, she slept in the chair beside her mother's hospital bed, waking every hour to make sure Catherine was still breathing. In the morning, she kissed her mother's forehead and whispered that she'd be back soon, that everything was going to be okay now. More lies. At exactly 10 o'clock, a black town car pulled up outside Celine's building. The driver got out. A serious man in his 40s who introduced himself as Victor and said nothing else. He helped her with her single suitcase, she'd packed light like Cassian demanded, and held the door open. Inside, the car smelled like leather and money. She sat rigid in the back seat as Victor navigated through traffic, heading north toward the Moretti estate. The drive took 40 minutes. 40 minutes for Celine to second-guess every decision, to imagine all the ways this could end badly, to wonder if she'd just traded her mother's death for her own. The estate looked different in daylight, less haunted, more impressive. The gates opened automatically, and they drove down a tree-lined driveway that seemed to stretch for miles. The mansion came into view, gray stone, black marble, tall windows that reflected the sky like mirrors. Victor parked near a side entrance and retrieved her suitcase. "This way, Miss Vale." He led her through a door she'd never used before, down a hallway that smelled like lemon polish and old money. They climbed a staircase with an iron railing, past rooms she'd only ever cleaned from the outside. Finally, Victor stopped in front of a heavy wooden door and produced a key. "Your suite," he said simply. The room beyond was beautiful, not ostentatious like the rest of the estate, but comfortable. A bedroom with a massive four-poster bed, a sitting area with a couch and television, a bathroom with a tub big enough to drown in. Windows overlooked the garden, where rain had left everything green and fresh. "Mr. Moretti will send for you when he's ready," Victor said. "In the meantime, make yourself comfortable. There's a phone on the desk. Dial 0 for the kitchen if you need anything." He left her there. Celine stood in the center of the room, suitcase at her feet, and tried to process this new reality. 3 days ago, she'd been scrubbing blood off floors. Now she was living in a room that probably cost more to furnish than she'd earned in her entire life. This was insane. She unpacked her pathetic suitcase. A week's worth of clothes, her toothbrush, a photo of her parents from before everything went to hell. The photo looked ridiculous on the expensive dresser, cheap and out of place. Like her. Hours passed. She explored the suite, tested the shower, perfect water pressure, ate half a sandwich the kitchen sent up without her asking. She tried to read, but couldn't focus. Tried to watch TV, but everything felt surreal. At 7 o'clock, someone knocked. Celine opened the door to find a woman in her 30s, dark hair pulled into a sleek bun, wearing clothes that screamed designer. "Miss Vale?" The woman's smile was professional, unreadable. "I'm Natalia. Mr. Moretti would like you to join him for dinner. I'm here to help you get ready." "I can dress myself." "Of course you can." Natalia stepped inside, already moving toward the closet. "But tonight is important. First impressions matter in this house." She opened the closet, revealing clothes that definitely hadn't been there an hour ago. "Mr. Moretti had these sent over. I hope the sizes are correct." Celine stared. The closet was full. Dresses, pants, blouses, shoes, everything expensive, everything new. "How did he know my size?" "Mr. Moretti is thorough." Natalia pulled out a black dress, simple but elegant. "This one, I think, classic." She didn't have a choice. Not really. So Celine let herself be dressed like a doll, let Natalia fix her hair and apply makeup she didn't normally wear. When she finally looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked like someone who belonged in this house. That scared her more than anything. Natalia led her back through the mansion's maze of hallways, down a staircase Celine had never seen, to a dining room that wasn't the one she'd cleaned 3 nights ago. This one was smaller, more intimate, with a table set for 2. Cassian stood at the window, drink in hand, wearing a dark suit that probably cost more than her old car. He turned when they entered, and his eyes swept over her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Thank you, Natalia," he said. "That will be all." Natalia disappeared like smoke. They were alone. Cassian gestured to the table. "Hungry?" "Not really." "Sit anyway." It wasn't a suggestion. Celine moved to the chair he indicated, and he pulled it out for her like this was some kind of date and not whatever this actually was. He sat across from her, and staff she'd never seen before materialized to serve food she couldn't taste. The meal passed in near silence. Celine pushed food around her plate while Cassian watched her with that same calculating expression from the other night. She could feel him studying her, cataloging every nervous gesture, every tell. Finally, he set down his fork. "You're afraid of me." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes." "Good. Fear keeps people alive in this house." He leaned back in his chair. "But I don't want you terrified. Wary, yes. Respectful, absolutely, but not cowering." "Then maybe don't make people sign contracts at gunpoint." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I never pointed the gun at you." "You didn't have to." "No, I didn't." He stood and walked to a sideboard, poured himself another drink. "Do you know why I chose you, Celine?" "Because I was stupid enough to say yes? Because you came back?" He turned to face her. 3 times. You could have walked away, could have let someone else deal with the mess. But you didn't. You saw something that needed fixing, and you fixed it, even when it was dangerous. He took a sip. "That's loyalty. That's competence. Those are rare things." "I'm not loyal to you." "Not yet." He moved closer, set his drink on the table beside her plate. But you will be, because I keep my promises, and you're going to realize that I'm the best thing that ever happened to you. You're delusional. Maybe. He crouched down beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level, close enough that she could smell his cologne again, see the faint scar above his left eyebrow. Or maybe you just don't know your own worth yet. His hand came up and she flinched instinctively. He froze, then slowly, carefully tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was gentle, possessive. I'm not going to hurt you, he said quietly, not unless you betray me. Are we clear? Her heart hammered against her ribs. Crystal. Good. He stood, the moment broken. Tomorrow, you start learning how this family works, what we do, what's expected. It won't be easy and there'll be things that shock you, but you'll adapt. You're a survivor, Celine. That's why you're here. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame, just like the first night. Get some rest, he said without looking back. You're going to need it. Then he was gone, and Celine was alone in the dining room with cold food and the weight of her new reality pressing down like a physical thing. She'd done it. Signed the contracts, moved into his house, put on his clothes, and smiled at his table. She'd sold herself for her mother's life, and there was no going back now. The chandelier overhead blazed with light, no leaks, no floods, everything perfect and polished and suffocating. Celine put her head in her hands and finally let herself cry. The first week, Celine learned how to be invisible again. Different kind of invisible than before. Not the maid scrubbing floors, but the ornament standing quietly in corners while men discussed things that could get her killed. Cassian kept her close. Not physically, not yet, but proximate enough that she became a fixture in rooms where decisions got made. Conference rooms where lawyers parsed contracts with language designed to obscure rather than clarify. The private study where Cassian met with men who wore expensive suits and carried themselves like coiled snakes. The garage where shipments arrived in unmarked vans at 3 a.m. She watched. She listened. She said nothing. You're doing well, Cassian told her on the 5th day. They were in his office, him behind a desk made of wood so dark it looked black, her standing by the window because sitting felt too casual. Most people ask questions. You haven't asked a single one. I figured you'd tell me what I need to know. Smart. He signed something without looking at it, the scratch of his pen loud in the quiet room. But you must be curious. She was. Desperately. But curiosity in this house felt like a liability, so she kept her face neutral and her mouth shut. Cassian studied her for a long moment, then stood and moved to the wall safe behind a painting of some dead ancestor. He worked the combination with practiced ease, pulled out a thick ledger, and dropped it on the desk between them. This is everything, he said. Every business, every operation, every dollar that moves through this family, legal and otherwise. He tapped the cover. Read it. Learn it. Because in 2 weeks you're going to help me audit the accounts, and I need to know you understand how the money flows. Celine stared at the ledger like it might bite her. Why would you show me this? Because you signed contracts that make you liable if you talk. Because you're smart enough to understand that knowing too much is the best insurance policy against betrayal. And he paused, something shifting in his expression. Because I want you to understand what you're part of now. She picked up the ledger. It was heavy, hundreds of pages, each one filled with numbers and codes that would take hours to decipher. This could put you in prison. Yes. So could I. Yes. He said it with no fear, no hesitation. That's called trust, Celine. I'm trusting you with my life. Eventually, you'll trust me with yours. She didn't know what to say to that, so she took the ledger and left. That night, she sat in her suite and opened the book. The first page nearly made her close it immediately, a list of names, dates, and amounts that clearly documented money laundering through a chain of restaurants. Page 2 was worse. Page 3 made her want to vomit. By page 10, she understood exactly what the Moretti empire was built on. Drugs, mostly. High-end stuff, nothing that touched kids, but still poison sold to people too desperate or stupid to refuse it. Protection rackets that were just extortion with a polite name. Gambling operations that destroyed families. Loan sharking with interest rates that should be illegal but weren't, technically, because of loopholes lawyers had carved out like surgeons. And underneath it all, violence. Implied on every page, coded into the language, contract negotiations that meant broken bones, restructuring that meant bodies disappeared, asset liquidation that meant someone had become a liability. Celine read until dawn, until her eyes burned and her stomach churned, until she'd memorized enough of the structure to sketch it from memory. Then she closed the book and sat staring at nothing while the sun rose over the gardens. Her mother was alive because of this blood money. The medicine flowing through Catherine's veins, the doctors keeping her comfortable, the private room with its park view, all of it paid for by suffering. She wanted to feel guilty, wanted to hate herself. Instead, she just felt tired. At 7, someone knocked. Natalia, with breakfast on a tray and clothes already selected for the day. The routine had established itself quickly. Wake, dress, eat, attend whatever meetings Cassian required, visit her mother in the afternoon, return for dinner, sleep. Repeat. Mr. Moretti wants you downstairs in 30 minutes, Natalia said, setting the tray on the desk. Her eyes flicked to the ledger, then away. Too quick to comment, but slow enough to acknowledge she'd seen it. Wear the gray suit. Selene showered fast, dressed in the clothes Cassian had bought. Tailored pants, silk blouse, jacket that made her look like someone who belonged in boardrooms. She didn't recognize the woman in the mirror anymore. That girl who'd scrubbed floors in thrift store jeans had been buried under expensive fabric and carefully applied makeup. Cassian was waiting in the foyer, already dressed, checking his phone. He looked up when she descended the stairs, and something flickered in his expression. Approval, maybe? Or possession? We have a meeting in the city, he said without preamble, with someone important. You'll observe, nothing more. Don't speak unless I tell you to. Who are we meeting? A judge who owes me a favor. I'm collecting. The drive took 40 minutes. Cassian spent most of it on the phone, conversations conducted in careful code that she was starting to understand. The shipment arrived early meant drugs had cleared customs. Our friend agreed to the terms meant someone had been persuaded, probably with threats. The problem was resolved meant violence. They met the judge at a restaurant that wasn't open yet, just staff prepping for lunch service. The man was in his 60s, gray hair, kind face that probably looked trustworthy from the bench. He stood when they entered, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Cassian, good to see you. Judge Morrison. Cassian's handshake was firm, brief. This is Celine Vale. She's with me now. Morrison's gaze swept over her, assessing. She kept her face blank the way she'd learned and said nothing. They sat at a corner table. Coffee appeared without anyone ordering it. Cassian leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed, while Morrison fidgeted with his cup. The case is scheduled for next month, Morrison said quietly. I've reviewed the evidence. It's thin, circumstantial at best. Then you'll dismiss it. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. Cassian's voice didn't change, still calm, but something in it made Morrison flinch. You'll cite insufficient evidence, declare a mistrial, and my associate walks free. That's why we're having this conversation. There are protocols, people watching. If I'm too obvious, then don't be obvious. Cassian took a sip of his coffee, utterly unconcerned. You're a smart man, Judge. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Morrison's jaw tightened. And if I refuse? You won't. But if I did, Cassian set down his cup very carefully. When he spoke, his voice was soft enough that Celine had to strain to hear it. Then I'd be very disappointed. And when I'm disappointed, I remember things. Like that weekend you spent in Atlantic City 2 years ago, the hotel suite, the girl who said she was 21 but wasn't. He paused. I have photos, Judge, very detailed photos. Would be a shame if they ended up with the Bar Association. The blood drained from Morrison's face. I didn't know. I know you didn't. She lied. But do you think anyone will care? Cassian leaned forward slightly. Or we could skip all that unpleasantness, and you could just do your job. Dismiss the case. My associate walks. Everyone's happy. Morrison looked like he might be sick. After a long moment, he nodded. Good. Cassian stood, buttoning his jacket. I knew we could come to an understanding. Have a nice day, Judge. Outside, Celine climbed into the car on legs that felt unsteady. She waited until they'd pulled into traffic before speaking. You're blackmailing a federal judge. Yes? Illegal? Immoral? Dangerous? Cassian glanced at her, amused. All of the above. Welcome to how the world actually works, Celine. Power isn't about who's right. It's about who has leverage. He looked terrified. He should be. He made a mistake, and mistakes have consequences. Cassian turned his attention back to his phone. But now he'll do what I need, and everyone benefits. My associate stays out of prison, Morrison keeps his reputation, and the world keeps turning. What if he goes to the police? He won't. He's in too deep now. That's the beauty of leverage. Once you have it, people trap themselves trying to protect what they might lose. Celine stared out the window, watching the city blur past. Is that what you did to me? Gave me something I couldn't afford to lose? Yes. The honesty of it hit her like a slap. She'd known, of course, had understood from the beginning that her mother's treatment was the chain keeping her here, but hearing him admit it so casually made something twist in her chest. At least you're honest about it, she said quietly. Always. He put away his phone, giving her his full attention. I could lie, dress it up in prettier language. Tell you this is about partnership or mutual benefit. But we both know what this is. I own you, Celine. Might as well be honest about it. I'm not property. Aren't you? He tilted his head, studying her. You live in my house, wear clothes I bought, eat food I provide. Your mother's alive because I allow it. If I withdrew my support tomorrow, where would you go? What would you do? Nowhere. Nothing. He'd made sure of that. I hate you, she said. No, you don't. Not yet. He smiled, sharp and knowing. But you will eventually. They all do. The question is whether you'll hate me enough to leave or whether you'll hate me and stay anyway. Why would I stay if I hate you? Because leaving means your mother dies. Because you've already compromised your morals, so what's a little more corruption? Because, he leaned closer, voice dropping. Because part of you is curious about what comes next, about how deep this goes, about who you'll become if you stay. He was right, and that realization made her want to scream. She did hate him, but she was also fascinated by him, by the casual way he wielded power, by the certainty with which he moved through the world. He was terrible and magnetic, and she couldn't look away. I need to visit my mother, she said, desperate to end this conversation. Of course. We'll stop by the hospital now. Catherine looked better. Not healed, cancer didn't work that fast, but more comfortable. The first round of treatment had gone well, and her color had improved slightly. She smiled when Celine walked in, a real smile, and patted the bed beside her. Tell me everything, Catherine said. How's the new job? Celine had prepared lies, safe, boring lies about administrative work and long hours. But sitting there, holding her mother's hand, the lies stuck in her throat. It's complicated, she said finally. Complicated bad or complicated interesting? Both. Catherine studied her face with a mother's too perceptive gaze. You're not happy. I'm fine. You're miserable, I can see it. Her mother's grip tightened. Baby, if this job is making you unhappy, quit. We'll figure something else out. We won't, Celine wanted to scream. There is no other way. This is the only option. But she couldn't say that, couldn't admit what she'd become, so she forced a smile and changed the subject. The doctors say you're responding well to treatment. That's what matters. They talked about nothing for an hour. TV shows, hospital food, the view from the window. Safe topics, easy lies. When visiting hours ended, Celine kissed her mother's forehead and promised to come back tomorrow. In the hallway, she found Cassian waiting. He'd given her privacy during the visit, but apparently privacy only extended so far. How is she? He asked. Better, thanks to you. Don't thank me. You're paying for it. He started walking toward the elevator, and she fell into step beside him. Every day you stay, every compromise you make, that's the payment. You really can't help yourself, can you? Being cruel? I'm not being cruel, I'm being clear. The elevator doors opened and they stepped inside. Cruelty would be lying to you, making you think this is something it's not. I'm giving you the truth. What you do with it is up to you. The doors closed, sealing them in. Celine watched the floor numbers descend and tried to remember the girl she'd been 2 weeks ago. That girl seemed impossibly far away now, like a character in a story she'd read once and half forgotten. Why me? She asked. You could have anyone. Why choose someone who hates you? Cassian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, less certain, more raw. Because everyone else is afraid to. They smile and agree and tell me what I want to hear. He glanced at her. You're honest. You hate me, but you're here anyway. That's more real than anything I've had in years. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened and he walked out without looking back, leaving her standing there trying to process what he'd just admitted. Maybe he was human after all. Maybe underneath the violence and power, there was something that wanted connection badly enough to force it into existence. That should have made her feel better. Instead, it made everything worse. The second week, Cassian started bringing her to the real meetings. Not the polite conversations in restaurants, but the actual business. Warehouses at midnight, back rooms of clubs that didn't officially exist, the kind of places where guns were displayed openly, and everyone assessed everyone else for weaknesses. She met his captains first. Marco, who ran the drug operations and had eyes like a shark. Flat, emotionless, always calculating. He looked at Celine like she was a problem he hadn't decided how to solve yet. Then Dominic, in charge of security, built like a tank and twice as dangerous. He barely acknowledged her existence, which somehow felt more respectful than Marco's open hostility. And finally Vincent, the family consigliere, a man in his 50s who dressed like an undertaker and spoke in careful legalese that made threats sound like advice. He was the only one who smiled at her, which made her trust him least of all. "So you're the new pet," Marco said during their first meeting together. They were in a warehouse in Queens, surrounded by crates that officially contained textiles, but actually held something much more profitable. "What's your story, sweetheart? You screwing the boss, or is this some kind of charity case?" "Marco." Cassian's voice cut across the space like a blade. "Watch your mouth." "I'm just asking. You're just stepping out of line." Cassian didn't raise his voice, didn't move from where he leaned against a crate, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Selena is under my protection. That means she's untouchable. Anyone who forgets that will find themselves very suddenly unemployed. Am I clear?" Marco raised his hands in mock surrender. "Crystal, boss. No offense meant." "None taken," Celine said, surprising herself. "But for the record, I'm not screwing anyone. I'm here because Mr. Moretti believes I'm useful. Whether that's true remains to be seen." Marco's eyebrows rose. "She's got a spine. Interesting." "She's got more than that," Cassian said, straightening. "Now stop posturing and show me the inventory." The meeting continued, numbers and codes and discussions about distribution channels that made Celine's skin crawl. But she kept her face neutral, took mental notes, and said nothing unless directly asked. This was survival. This was the price of her mother's life. Afterward, in the car, Cassian handed her a phone. Not her old one. A new device, expensive, probably encrypted. "You're on call now," he said. "I need to reach you anytime, and you need to be able to reach me. The contacts are already programmed. Don't add anyone else." She turned the phone over in her hands. Another chain, another way to track her, control her, keep her tethered to his world. "What if I don't want to be on call?" "Then your mother's treatment stops tomorrow." He said it without emotion, just stating a fact. "I'm not asking, Celine. This is the job. You're either all in or you're out. Choose." She pocketed the phone. Smart girl. That night, alone in her suite, Celine stared at the new phone and tried to remember what freedom felt like. She'd been here 2 weeks, and already she couldn't imagine leaving. Not because she didn't want to, but because the idea of her mother back in that terrible apartment, dying slowly while Celine worked 3 jobs for nothing, that was unthinkable now. Cassian had trapped her perfectly, given her just enough comfort, just enough hope, that the old life looked unbearable by comparison. The phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Still awake?" She knew who it was. Only one person had this number. "Unfortunately," she typed back, "come to my study. East Wing, 3rd floor. We need to talk." It wasn't a request. She changed out of her pajamas into jeans and a sweater, then navigated the dark hallways to the East Wing. The estate was quieter at night, just the occasional security guard nodding at her as she passed. They knew her face now, knew she belonged. Cassian's study was all dark wood and leather, shelves lined with books that looked read rather than decorative. He sat behind his desk, tie loosened, looking more exhausted than she'd ever seen him. "Close the door," he said. She did, then stood awkwardly in the middle of the room. What's wrong? Sit. She sat in the chair across from his desk, the same chair where men probably begged for their lives or negotiated for mercy they wouldn't receive. The leather was worn smooth by years of use. Cassian poured 2 glasses of whiskey, slid one across the desk to her. She didn't drink it. We have a problem, he said. Marco. What about him? He's skimming, has been for months, maybe longer. Small amounts, nothing obvious, but it adds up. Cassian's jaw tightened. I need you to audit his books, find out how much he's stolen and where it went. Why me? Why not Vincent or one of your accountants? Because Marco knows all of them. He doesn't know you, and... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Because I need to know if I can trust you with something real, not just observation, actual work. This was a test. Had to be. Marco was dangerous, the kind of man who'd kill without hesitation if he felt threatened, and Cassian wanted her to essentially investigate him, to gather evidence that could end with Marco dead in a ditch. If I find proof he's stealing, Celine said slowly, what happens to him? That depends on how bad it is. He gets hurt. Probably. Killed? Possibly. Cassian took a sip of his whiskey, watching her over the rim of the glass. Does that bother you? Yes. Of course it did. Marco was terrible, but he was human, and she'd be signing his death warrant. It should bother you too, she said, instead of answering. It doesn't. Not anymore. He set down his glass. I learned a long time ago that mercy in this world gets you killed. Marco stole from me. That's betrayal. Betrayal has consequences. Even if he has a family? Especially if he has a family. It sends a message. No one is protected if they cross me. Celine looked at the whiskey he'd poured for her, amber liquid catching the lamplight. What if I refuse? Then I find someone else to do it, and you become useless to me. And useless people don't last long, I get it. She picked up the glass and drank, the burn harsh down her throat. Fine, I'll do it, but I want something in return. Cassian's eyebrows rose. You're negotiating with me? You said I'm smart. Smart people don't work for free. A slow smile spread across his face. What do you want? Information about the business. Real information, not just what I can piece together from ledgers. If I'm going to be useful, I need to understand how everything works. That's dangerous knowledge. More dangerous than what I already know? She leaned forward. You've already shown me enough to put you away for life. Might as well show me the rest. He studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Respect, maybe, or intrigue. All right, Tit, he said finally. I'll teach you. Everything. But if you use that knowledge against me, you'll kill me. I know. She finished the whiskey and stood. When do I start on Marco's books? Tomorrow. I'll have everything delivered to your suite. He stood as well, moving around the desk. Celine. She paused at the door. You did well today, at the warehouse. Marco was testing you, and you didn't flinch. I was terrified. I know, but you didn't show it. That's what matters. He was close enough now that she could smell his cologne, see the faint stubble on his jaw. You're stronger than you think, or more desperate. Same thing, in my experience. They stood there in the quiet study, too close, the air between them charged with something she didn't want to name. Then Cassian stepped back, the moment broken. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Celine left before she could do something stupid. Like ask him why he looked at her the way he did. Like admit that some part of her, some small traitorous part, was starting to enjoy the attention. That night, she dreamed of blood and ledgers, numbers that turned into bodies. Marco's shark eyes watching her from the shadows. She woke at dawn with her heart racing and the certainty that she was in way over her head. But she got up anyway, got dressed, ate breakfast. And when the boxes of Marco's financial records arrived at her suite, she opened them and started working. 3 days later, she had her answer. Marco had stolen over $2 million across 18 months, funneling it through shell companies and offshore accounts that would have stayed hidden if she hadn't known what to look for. The evidence was damning, meticulous, impossible to deny. She showed Cassian in his study, spreading the documents across his desk while he read in silence. His expression didn't change, but his hands clenched into fists. He stole from the medical fund, Cassian said finally, voice deadly quiet. The money that pays for your mother's treatment, for other families' treatments. He stole from people who are dying. Celine hadn't noticed that detail. She looked again at the accounts, saw the transfers, and felt something cold settle in her stomach. Marco had taken money meant for cancer patients and used it to line his own pockets. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "What do you think I should do?" She knew what he wanted to hear, violence, retribution. But she couldn't make herself say it, couldn't give him permission for what came next. "I don't know," she said quietly. "Yes, you do." Cassian stood, gathering the documents. "He signed death warrants for people like your mother, for gambling, debts, and greed. Tell me, Celine, what does justice look like?" The question was a trap, an invitation to become complicit, to cross a line she couldn't uncross. If she said kill him, she'd be no different than Cassian. If she said let him go, she'd be weak, useless, someone who couldn't make hard choices. "I don't want this on me," she said finally. "Whatever you do, it's your decision, not mine." "Coward." The word hit like a punch. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." Cassian moved around the desk, stopping inches away. "You want the benefits of this life. Your mother's treatment, the safety, the money, but you don't want to pay the real price. You want to stay clean while other people get their hands dirty for you. That's cowardice." "I'm not a killer. No one's asking you to pull the trigger. I'm asking you to have the spine to acknowledge what needs to happen. Marco stole. People died because of it. That demands a response. Stop hiding behind morality and tell me what you actually want." Celine's hands were shaking. She hated him in that moment, hated the way he saw through every defense, hated that he was right. She did want Marco punished, did want him to suffer for stealing money meant to save lives. But admitting that meant admitting she was capable of cruelty, and that was a truth she wasn't ready to face. "I want—" Her voice broke. She swallowed hard and tried again. "I want him to hurt the way my mother hurt, the way all those families hurt when they couldn't afford treatment." Something blazed in Cassian's eyes. Not victory exactly, something darker. "Okay," he said softly. "Then that's what he'll get." He made a phone call in front of her. Short, clipped sentences that didn't spell out exactly what would happen, but made it clear Marco's days were numbered. When he hung up, the deed was done. No going back. "How do you feel?" Cassian asked. "Sick." "That'll pass. The first time is always hardest." He touched her face, gentle, possessive. "But you made the right choice. You'll see." She wanted to pull away from his touch, wanted to scream that there were no right choices here, only degrees of wrong. But she was so tired of fighting, so exhausted by the constant moral calculations, that she just stood there and let him cup her jaw like something precious. "You're mine now," Cassian said. "Not just because of the contracts, because you chose this. You chose me." "I chose my mother's life." "Same thing." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "You belong to me, Celine. Might as well accept it." Then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was possessive and demanding, the kiss of a man claiming territory. She froze for half a second, shocked. Then something in her broke open, and she kissed him back with all the fury and fear and desperate confusion she'd been holding inside. His hands tangled in her hair. She grabbed his shirt, pulling him closer, and they kissed like drowning people, like the world was ending, and this was the last moment that mattered. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cassian's eyes were dark with want. "We shouldn't," Celine started. "Too late." He kissed her again, softer this time, but no less intense. "We already did." She knew he was right. Knew that this was the point of no return, the moment she stopped being his employee and became something else entirely, something more dangerous. But she was so tired of resisting, tired of being alone in her fear. And Cassian was here, solid and certain, offering something that felt almost like comfort, even though she knew it was poison. So she let him kiss her, let him pull her closer, let herself fall into the gravity that had been pulling at her since the night she'd first looked up and met his cold silver eyes. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice whispered that she'd just made a terrible mistake. But that voice was easy to ignore when Cassian's mouth was on hers, and his hands were burning through her clothes, and everything else faded into insignificance. Marco disappeared 3 days later. No one said where or how, but everyone knew what it meant. The warehouse meetings got quieter. People looked at Cassian differently, more fear, more respect. And they looked at Celine differently too, because she'd been the one who found the evidence. She'd become part of the machine now, the thing that killed people who stepped out of line. Dominic was the one who acknowledged it first. They were in a car heading back from a meeting, and he turned to her from the front seat. "You did good work," he said simply. "Finding Marco's theft, that took skill." "Thanks," she said, though the compliment made her want to vomit. "Most people in your position would have warned him, tried to get a cut or make a deal. You didn't. That means you're loyal." His eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. Boss doesn't give loyalty lightly. Don't waste it. After he got out, Cassian slid into the back seat beside her. "Dominic likes you. That's rare. Should I be flattered?" "Yes. He's killed men for less." Cassian's hand found hers, fingers interlacing. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine." Liar. But he didn't push, just held her hand while the city blurred past outside. "Your mother's doctor called. The treatment's working better than expected. She might go into remission." Celine's breath caught. "Really? Really?" He squeezed her hand. "See? You made the right choice." But the relief was tainted now, forever mixed with the knowledge that Marco's blood had bought her mother's life, that every breath Catherine took was paid for with someone else's suffering. "I need you tonight," Cassian said quietly. "There's a dinner. Politicians, investors, people who need to see that the Moretti family is respectable and civilized. You'll be there with me." "As what?" "As mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have bothered her. Instead, it sent heat curling through her stomach. "People will talk," she said. "Let them. I want them to know you're under my protection, that touching you means war." That night, Natalia dressed her in a gown that cost more than a car, deep green silk that clung to every curve, diamonds at her throat and wrists, borrowed from the family vault, each stone worth enough to solve all the problems she'd had 6 weeks ago. She looked like someone who belonged at Cassian's side, someone powerful, someone dangerous. The dinner was held at the estate, the formal dining room transformed into something from a magazine. Crystal chandeliers, white linens, flowers that probably cost thousands. Celine stood beside Cassian at the entrance, greeting guests like she'd been doing this her whole life. A senator, a real estate developer, a woman who owned half the restaurants in Manhattan. They all smiled and made polite conversation, and none of them acknowledged what everyone knew, that Cassian Moretti was a criminal, and they were all here to pay tribute. Throughout dinner, Cassian's hand never left her waist. He introduced her again and again. "This is Celine Vale. She's with me." The message was clear. She was his now, publicly, officially. The senator's wife leaned close during dessert, voice low. "You're very brave, dear. Or very foolish." "Why's that?" Celine asked. "Cassian Moretti doesn't do relationships. He does acquisitions. Everything he touches, he owns." The woman's smile was pitying. "I hope you know what you've gotten yourself into." Celine looked across the table at Cassian, who was deep in conversation with the real estate developer. As if sensing her attention, he glanced up and their eyes met. His expression softened slightly, just for her, before returning to business. "I'm starting to," Celine said quietly. After dinner, guests lingered for drinks and networking. Celine played her part perfectly, smiling, making conversation, saying nothing of substance. She'd learned from the best, after all. Cassian had taught her well. Around midnight, she stepped out onto the balcony for air. The garden stretched out below, dark and manicured, everything in its place. She heard the door open behind her, knew without looking who it was. "Tired?" Cassian asked, moving to stand beside her. "Exhausted. How do you do this all the time?" "Practice. And the knowledge that if I don't, the whole empire falls apart." He leaned against the railing, looking out at the darkness. "But it gets easier, eventually." "Does it?" "No," I lied. He glanced at her, almost smiling. "It never gets easier. You just get better at pretending." They stood in comfortable silence, the party noise muted through the glass doors. Celine realized this was the most honest conversation they'd had. No games, no power plays, just two people who were tired of performing. "I'm going to ask you something," Cassian said finally. and I want the truth. Okay. Do you regret it? Signing the contracts, coming here, all of it. All. She thought about her mother, alive and improving. Thought about the poverty and desperation she'd escaped. But she also thought about Marco, wherever his body ended up. Thought about the person she was becoming, hard and complicit and capable of things that would have horrified her 6 weeks ago. Sometimes, she admitted. But then I remember the alternative, and the regret fades. That's honest. He turned to face her fully. I need to tell you something about what happens next. What do you mean? This, us, it's not casual for me. I don't do casual. His eyes were intense in the dim light. When I want something, I keep it. And I want you, Celine, not just as an employee or an asset, as mine, completely. Her heart hammered. Cassian, I know you don't feel the same way yet. That's fine. But I'm giving you fair warning. I'm not letting you go, ever. So if you have any thoughts about leaving once your mother's better, forget them. You're mine now. It should have terrified her, should have sent her running. Instead, she felt something close to relief, because at least it was honest. At least he wasn't pretending this was anything other than possession. And if I said no, if I told you I'd never be yours, I'd say you're lying. He moved closer, crowding her against the railing. I can see it, Celine. The way you look at me, the way you kissed me. You want this as much as I do. You're just too scared to admit it. He was close enough now that she could feel his heat, smell his cologne, see the pulse beating in his throat. And he was right. She did want him, despite everything, despite all the logical reasons why she shouldn't. You're impossible, she whispered. I know. He leaned in, lips brushing her ear. But I'm yours anyway. Then he kissed her, deep and claiming, and she kissed him back because denying it was pointless. She was falling, had been falling since that first night, and there was no one to catch her but the man who'd pushed her over the edge in the first place. When they finally broke apart, Cassian's eyes were dark with promise. Come to my room tonight. That's a bad idea. Probably. His thumb traced her lower lip. Do it anyway. She knew she should refuse. Knew that sleeping with him would cement this connection, would make leaving impossible, even if she found the courage to try. But she was so tired of being alone, so desperate for something that felt real, that she nodded. Okay. His smile was pure triumph. Midnight. Don't make me wait. He went back inside, leaving her on the balcony with her racing heart and the terrible certainty that she'd just crossed a line she could never uncross. At 1:45, Celine stood outside Cassian's bedroom door, hand raised to knock, trying to convince herself to walk away. This was insane. Dangerous. Every therapist in the world would tell her to run. But her mother was alive because of him. And she was alive because of him too, in a way. The old Celine had died. And this new version, harder and sharper, had been born in his world. She knocked. The door opened immediately. Cassian stood there in dark pants and an unbuttoned shirt, looking at her like she was the only thing that mattered in the universe. I thought you might not come, he said. I thought about it. But you're here. I'm here. He stepped aside, letting her enter. The room was enormous, bigger than her old apartment, with a bed that could sleep 4 and windows overlooking the gardens. Personal in a way the rest of the house wasn't. She saw books on the nightstand, clothes draped over a chair, the small human details that reminded her he was more than just a monster in a suit. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Cassian moved closer, slow and deliberate, giving her every chance to change her mind. When he reached her, he didn't grab or demand. He just stood there, waiting. Last chance, he said quietly. Walk away now, and we'll pretend this never happened. You're lying. You said you'd never let me go. I lied. If you leave right now, I'll let you walk. No consequences, no punishment. His eyes were serious. But if you stay, Celine, if you stay, you're mine. Understand? She understood. Understood that this was the real point of no return. That everything before now had been preamble, and this moment would define everything that came after. She should leave, should protect what little remained of her soul. Instead, she reached up and pulled him down into a kiss. Cassian made a sound low in his throat, something between relief and possession, and then his control shattered. He kissed her like he was starving, hands everywhere, pulling her closer. She responded with equal desperation, Months of tension and fear and want finally breaking free. They barely made it to the bed. Clothes disappeared, shed in a trail across expensive carpet. When he finally settled his weight over her, Celine looked up into silver eyes dark with need and realized this was surrender. Complete, irreversible surrender. Mine, Cassian breathed against her throat. And because she was done lying to herself, she whispered back, yours. What happened next was consuming and desperate and nothing like she'd imagined. Cassian touched her like she might disappear if he wasn't careful, like he'd been waiting for this for longer than 6 weeks. And Celine let herself drown in it, let herself forget about morality and consequences and just feel. Later, much later, she lay wrapped in his arms while he traced patterns on her bare shoulder. Outside, the first hints of dawn were touching the sky. No regrets? He asked quietly. She wanted to say yes, wanted to claim this was a mistake, but lying seemed pointless when they were this exposed. Not yet, she admitted. Fair enough. He pulled her closer. Get some sleep. We have a busy day tomorrow. Doing what? Whatever I need you to do. He kissed her temple. Because you're mine now, remember? Completely. She should have protested, should have insisted she was her own person, but exhaustion dragged at her, and Cassian's warmth was seductive, and maybe he was right. Maybe she was his now. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her. When she woke hours later, tangled in expensive sheets with Cassian's arm heavy across her waist, sunlight streaming through windows she'd watched the dawn break through, Celine realized something that made her stomach drop. She wasn't just trapped by contracts and money anymore. She was trapped by something much more dangerous. She was starting to fall in love with her captor. And that, more than anything else, meant she was truly, completely lost. Awoke. 2 months passed. Celine moved through Cassian's world like she'd always belonged there, sitting in on meetings, managing accounts, learning the business from the inside. She visited her mother every afternoon, watched Catherine's health improve day by day, and tried not to think about the cost. At night, she went to Cassian's bed. Always his room, never hers. Like even in this, he needed to maintain control. And she let him, because fighting felt exhausting and being held felt good, and somewhere along the way, she'd stopped counting the compromises. Her mother noticed the change. You look different, Catherine said one afternoon. Healthier, less scared. The job's gotten easier. Is that all? Celine wanted to lie, but her mother's gaze was too knowing. I'm seeing someone. The Moretti boy? How did you... I'm not blind, baby. The way he looks at you when he visits, the way you look at him. Catherine's smile was sad. He's dangerous. I know. But you love him anyway. Celine opened her mouth to deny it, but the words stuck. Because it was true. Somewhere between the blackmail and the murder and the late nights in his bed, she'd fallen for Cassian Moretti. Not despite his darkness, but because of the glimpses of humanity underneath, the way he remembered her coffee order, the gentleness he showed when he thought no one was watching, the vulnerability he only ever showed her. I'm trying not to, she said finally. That's not how love works. Catherine squeezed her hand. Just be careful. Men like him, they don't know how to love without destroying. Her mother was right, but by then it was too late to be careful. The night everything changed started like any other. Celine was in Cassian's study, working through shipping manifests, when he walked in looking troubled. We need to talk, he said, closing the door behind him. She set down her pen. What's wrong? How do you feel about children? The question came out of nowhere, stealing her breath. What? Children. Do you want them? He moved to the bar, poured himself a drink. Eventually, not now. I haven't really thought about it. Why? Because I have. He turned to face her, expression unreadable. I'm building an empire, Celine. When I die, it needs to go to someone. Family. Blood. Understanding crept in slowly, cold and horrifying. You want me to have your child? Eventually, yes. He said it like it was reasonable, like he was discussing a business merger. Not right now, but in a year or two, once things are more stable. Once... You're insane. I'm practical. You're talking about me like I'm breeding stock. I'm talking about our future. He set down his glass and crossed to her. We're together, Celine. We have been for months. This is the logical next step. The logical next step is asking, not commanding. She stood, backing away. You can't just decide I'm going to have your baby. Why not? You're mine. We've established that. Having children is what people do when they're building a life together. Normal people, people who got together normally, who weren't forced. Don't. His voice went cold. Don't pretend you were forced into my bed. You came willingly. You stay willingly. You love me willingly. The truth of it hit her like a slap. He was right. She did love him, and that love had made her blind to how completely he'd consumed her. I need time, she said, voice shaking, to think about this. You have until next month. That's not enough. It'll have to be. He moved closer, backing her against the desk. I've been patient, Celine. I've given you time to adjust, to accept this life. But I'm done waiting. We're moving forward, together, the way I always intended. And if I refuse? His eyes went flat. You won't. But if I did, then we'd have a problem. He leaned in, close enough that she could feel his breath on her face. But you're smarter than that. You know what's at stake. Your mother's health, your position here, us. You wouldn't throw all that away over something that's inevitable anyway. The casual cruelty of it, the assumption that she'd bend, that she'd give him anything he wanted because he'd already taken everything else, made something inside her snap. Get away from me, she said quietly. Celine, get away. He studied her face, then stepped back. You're upset. That's understandable. We'll discuss this tomorrow when you've calmed down. There's nothing to discuss. I'm not having your child just because you decided it's time. That's not how this works. Actually, his smile was sharp. That's exactly how this works. You're mine, remember? Everything about you belongs to me, including your future, including any children we might have. You're out of your mind. Maybe, but I'm also the man keeping your mother alive. Don't forget that. The threat hung in the air between them, explicit, finally. Do what I want, or Catherine dies. Celine felt something inside her chest crack. I hate you. You've said that before. You didn't mean it then either. He moved to the door, paused. Get some rest. We'll talk tomorrow. He left her standing there, shaking with fury and fear and the terrible knowledge that he was probably right, that she'd do exactly what he wanted, because the alternative was unthinkable. That night, Celine didn't go to his room. She stayed in her suite, door locked, trying to figure out how she'd ended up here. How she'd gone from cleaning floors to being trapped in a gilded cage, in love with her captor, expected to bear his children whether she wanted to or not. Her phone buzzed. Cassian. Come to bed. She ignored it. Another text. Don't make me come get you. She turned off her phone. For 3 days, she avoided him. Skipped meetings, ate in her room, spent all her time at the hospital with her mother. Catherine was in remission now, officially, the cancer beaten back. Mission accomplished, goal achieved, except the price kept going up. On the 4th day, Cassian cornered her in the hallway. We need to talk, he said, voice dangerous. I don't want to talk to you. I don't care. He grabbed her arm, not painful but firm, and steered her into a nearby room. It was a sitting room, unused, dust covers over the furniture. He closed the door and leaned against it, blocking her exit. You're avoiding me. Congratulations on noticing. This is childish. So is demanding I have your baby like I'm property. You are property. The words exploded out of him, raw and furious. That's the deal, Celine. You signed the contracts. You took the money. You slept in my bed and let me... He stopped, visibly collecting himself. You don't get to back out now just because you're scared. I'm not scared. I'm angry. There's a difference. Fine. Be angry, but don't punish me for wanting a future with you. He pushed off the door, moving closer. I love you. Do you understand that? I love you. And people who love each other build lives together, have families. The confession should have softened her. Instead, it made everything worse. That's not love, she said quietly. Love doesn't trap people, doesn't threaten them, doesn't demand they give up control of their own bodies. Then what would you call it? Obsession, possession, control. She met his eyes. You don't love me, Cassian. You own me. There's a difference. Something in his expression crumbled. For a moment, he looked young and lost, the boy beneath the monster showing through. Is that really what you think? He asked. After everything? Yes. He stared at her for a long moment, then turned and walked out without another word. Celine stood alone in the dusty sitting room and wondered if she'd just made a terrible mistake, or the first honest choice she'd made in months. That night, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered without thinking. Miss Vale? A woman's voice, professional. This is Mount Sinai. Your mother's had a complication. You need to come right away. The bottom dropped out of Celine's world. What kind of complication? The doctor will explain. Please, just come. She ran. Through the house, out to where the cars were kept, finding Victor already waiting like he'd known she'd need him. The drive to the hospital felt endless. Every second stretched into hours while panic clawed at her throat. Catherine was in intensive care. The doctor explained in careful terms. Internal bleeding, possible organ failure. They were doing everything they could, but she needed to prepare herself. Celine sat beside her mother's bed, holding her hand, watching machines breathe for her. All the progress, all the improvement, suddenly reversed. Catherine looked small and frail again, life slipping away despite the medicine, despite the money, despite everything Celine had sacrificed. At dawn, Cassian appeared in the doorway. Celine looked up, and the expression on his face told her everything. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't bad luck. What did you do? She whispered. Nothing, I swear. He moved closer, hands raised. Celine, I would never. Get out. Let me explain. Get out! He left. But the damage was done. Doubt had taken root, and Celine couldn't shake the terrible suspicion that he'd somehow caused this, that he'd hurt her mother to teach her a lesson about defiance. The doctor came back an hour later with better news. Catherine had stabilized. The bleeding had stopped. She'd survive. But it had been close. Too close. Celine sat there as the sun climbed higher, holding her mother's hand, and realized she'd reached the true point of no return. She couldn't leave Cassian. Her mother needed the medical care only he could provide. But she couldn't trust him either, couldn't love someone who might have hurt her mother to maintain control. She was trapped. Completely, utterly, inescapably trapped. And the man she'd fallen in love with was either her savior or her mother's would-be killer, and she'd never know which. When Catherine finally woke that evening, weak but alive, she squeezed Celine's hand and whispered, "What happened?" Celine wanted to tell her the truth, wanted to confess everything, the contracts, the crimes, the man who owned her soul. But all she could manage was, "I don't know, Mom. I don't know." And as night fell over the hospital, Celine realized with crystal clarity that she'd crossed into territory where there were no good choices left, only survival, and the terrible question of how much of herself she'd have to destroy to achieve it. The answer came 2 days later. Catherine was home from the hospital, recovering, and Cassian appeared at Celine's suite with a small black box. "Open it," he said. Inside was a ring, diamond, enormous, the kind that made statements about ownership rather than love. "Marry me," Cassian said. And it wasn't a question, it was a command. And standing there looking at the ring that would seal her fate forever, Celine realized she'd already lost. She'd lost the moment she'd signed those first contracts. Maybe even before that. Maybe she'd lost the moment she'd looked up from that blood-stained floor and met Cassian Moretti's cold silver eyes. She started. But she never got to finish, because at that exact moment someone knocked on the door, and when Cassian opened it, one of his men stood there with an expression that meant everything was about to get worse. "Boss," the man said, "we have a problem. Federal raid. They're coming. Now." And just like that, Celine's decision about the ring became irrelevant, because suddenly they were all about to lose everything. The ring clattered to the floor, diamond catching the light as it rolled under the dresser. Neither of them moved to retrieve it. "How long?" Cassian's voice was ice. The man in the doorway, one of the younger guards, maybe 25, already sweating through his shirt, swallowed hard before answering. 20 minutes. Maybe less. They hit the warehouse in Queens 10 minutes ago. Dominic says they have warrants, real ones. Federal judges signed off. Cassian's jaw tightened, the only visible sign of the calculations running behind his eyes. Then he turned to Celine, and the look on his face made her blood freeze. Get dressed. Something you can run in. We're leaving. What about my mother? Victor's already pulling her from Mount Sinai. Private ambulance off the books. She'll be safe. He was moving as he talked, pulling a go bag from the back of her closet that she hadn't known was there. You have 3 minutes. Move. The guard disappeared. Cassian strode to the window, phone already against his ear. Vincent, talk to me. Celine couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she could read Cassian's body language, the way his shoulders tensed, the white-knuckle grip on the phone. Whatever Vincent was saying, it wasn't good. She changed fast, yanking on jeans and a dark hoodie, sneakers she could actually run in. Her hands shook so badly she could barely tie the laces. Federal raid. They were coming for Cassian, which meant they were coming for her too. All those contracts, all that complicity, she'd signed her name to his crimes. She was as guilty as he was now. Burned, Cassian said into the phone, voice flat. Everything. The ledgers, the files, all of it. I don't care how much it costs. Pause. No, absolutely not. You do not negotiate. You hear me? You burn it all, and you disappear. He ended the call and turned to find Celine dressed and waiting, the go-bag at her feet. Smart girl, he said, then grabbed her hand and pulled her into the hallway. The estate was chaos. Guards running in every direction, people shouting into phones, the sound of engines roaring to life in the garage below. They passed Natalia on the stairs, the woman who'd helped Celine dress for that first dinner a lifetime ago, and she looked terrified, clutching a briefcase like it might save her. Go, Cassian told her. Use the exit we discussed. Don't stop for anything. Natalia nodded and disappeared. They reached the garage to find 3 cars already gone, and Dominic waiting beside a nondescript sedan that looked nothing like the usual Moretti fleet. No driver. Just Dominic in the front seat, engine running, Vincent in the passenger side with a laptop balanced on his knees. Get in, Dominic barked. Cassian shoved Celine into the back seat and climbed in after her. The car was moving before the door fully closed, tires screaming as Dominic whipped them through the estate gates and onto the main road. Talk, Cassian said. Vincent didn't look up from his laptop. They have everything. Bank records, shipping manifests, testimonies from at least 3 people we thought were loyal. This isn't a fishing expedition. They know exactly what they're looking for. Who flipped? Working on it. Celine pressed herself into the corner of the seat, trying to process what was happening. Hours ago, her biggest problem had been whether to marry the man who owned her. Now they were fleeing a federal raid, burning evidence, running like criminals. Because that's what they were. What she was. Celine, Cassian's hand found hers in the dark. Look at me. She did, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. I need you to stay calm. Can you do that? She nodded, not trusting her voice. We're going to be okay. I have contingencies in place. Safe houses, money, passports, everything we need to disappear for as long as it takes. His grip tightened. But I need you with me. All the way. No second thoughts. No doubts. Understand? Did she? She wasn't sure anymore. The past few months felt like a fever dream. Marco's disappearance, her mother's mysterious complication, the ring Cassian had presented like a gilded trap. And now this. Running in the night while federal agents tore apart the only home she'd known since signing those contracts. My mother, she said quietly. You promised she'd be safe. She will be. Victor's the best. He'll get her somewhere secure, and we'll reunite once things settle. And if they don't settle? Cassian's expression went hard. They will. Because I don't lose, Celine. Ever. Dominic took a corner too fast, and Celine grabbed the door handle to keep from sliding across the seat. They were heading south, away from the city, into the kind of industrial wasteland where no one asked questions. Warehouses and abandoned factories, graffiti-covered walls, the American dream's corpse left to rot. Vincent finally looked up from his laptop. Found him. The temperature in this car dropped 20 degrees. Who? Cassian's voice was deadly quiet. Marco's younger brother, Tony. He made a deal 6 weeks ago. Witness protection in exchange for testimony about the organization's structure, financials, everything. Vincent turned the laptop to show them a scanned document. Witness cooperation agreement, Department of Justice letterhead, official stamps. He's been wearing a wire for 8 weeks. 8 weeks! Selene's mind raced back through recent memory. 8 weeks ago, Marco had just disappeared. His brother would have been angry, looking for answers, vulnerable to federal pressure, and they'd given him exactly what he needed to destroy them. Tony was at the warehouse meeting last week, Dominic said, knuckles white on the steering wheel. The one about the new distribution routes. He heard everything. Cassian said nothing, just stared at the laptop screen with an expression so cold it made Selene shiver. Then, very calmly, he pulled out his phone and made a call. I need an address, he said when someone answered. Tony Marco. Last known location, family, associates, everything. You have 10 minutes. He hung up. Boss, Vincent said carefully, if he's in witness protection, he's untouchable. Federal marshals will have him locked down tight. I don't care. Cassian, I don't care. Each word sharp as broken glass. He betrayed this family. He put all of us at risk. He endangered. His eyes flicked to Selene, then away. Find him. I'll handle the rest. They drove in silence after that. Selene watched the city disappear behind them, replaced by darkness and the occasional streetlight. Her phone buzzed, probably her mother wondering where she was. But Cassian plucked it from her hand and powered it down before she could check. No phones. They can track those. He pulled out a different device, something that looked military grade. Use this if you need to make calls. Encrypted. She took it numbly. Everything was happening too fast. This morning she'd been worried about a proposal. Now she was fleeing federal authorities with a man who was planning revenge on a witness. Where are we going? She asked. Safe house, 2 hours north, off the grid, no paper trail. Cassian was scrolling through his own encrypted phone, jaw tight. We'll stay there until I know more about the investigation's scope. And then? Then we decide whether to run or fight. The safe house turned out to be a cabin in the woods, the kind of place that looked abandoned until you got close enough to see the security cameras hidden in the trees and the reinforced door that probably cost more than the structure itself. Dominic parked behind the building, out of sight from the road, and they all climbed out into air that smelled like pine and rot. Inside was surprisingly comfortable. Furniture that didn't look like it came from a thrift store, a kitchen stocked with non-perishables, bedrooms upstairs. Someone had prepared for this possibility. Probably Cassian, always 10 steps ahead. Dominic, perimeter check, Cassian said, already moving through the space like he'd been here before. Vincent, I need you reaching out to our people in justice. Find out exactly what they have and who's running point on the investigation. Both men moved to comply, leaving Selene standing in the main room holding her go-bag and trying to figure out how this had become her life. Cassian disappeared upstairs, came back down with blankets and pillows. You should rest. It's going to be a long few days. I can't sleep. Try anyway. He was already turning toward what looked like a study, phone against his ear again, voice dropping into the coded language he used for business. Selene climbed the stairs to find 3 bedrooms, chose the one farthest from the others, and sat on the bed staring at nothing. Through the thin walls, she could hear Cassian's voice, steady and controlled, making call after call. Organizing, planning, doing whatever it took to maintain control even as his empire crumbled. She must have dozed eventually, because the next thing she knew, dawn light was seeping through the curtains and someone was knocking softly on her door. Come in. Vincent entered, looking exhausted, still holding that laptop. Cassian wants you downstairs. They'd gathered around a table in what passed for a dining room. Dominic stood by the window, keeping watch. Cassian sat at the head of the table, papers spread in front of him, and when Selene entered, his eyes tracked her movement with that same possessive intensity. Sit, he said. She sat. We have a problem, Cassian started, pushing a document toward her. Tony Marco didn't just give them financial records, he gave them you. Selene's blood went cold. What? Your name is all over the federal complaint. They know about the contracts, the work you did auditing Marco's books, everything. His finger tapped a highlighted section. They're calling you an accomplice. Conspiracy, money laundering, accessory to murder. You're facing 30 years minimum if they catch you. The room spun. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. But I didn't know. Doesn't matter. You signed the contracts. You worked for the organization. You found evidence that led to a man's death. Cassian's voice was matter-of-fact, delivering nightmare fuel like weather reports. In the eyes of the law, you're as guilty as I am. No. The word came out strangled. No, this can't. I was just trying to save my mother. And you did. But this price was higher than you realized. He sat back, watching her. Welcome to consequences, Celine. Vincent cleared his throat. There might be a way out. For her. Cassian's head whipped around. Explain. If she cooperates, testifies against you, they'd probably offer immunity in exchange for testimony about the organization's inner workings. Vincent kept his eyes carefully neutral. She'd walk away clean, new identity, witness protection, the whole package. The suggestion hung in the air like poison gas. Celine looked at Cassian, and for the first time since the raid started, she saw genuine fear in his expression. Not for himself, for what she might choose. You could do it, he said quietly. Testify. Save yourself. I wouldn't blame you. Wouldn't you? No. The lie was obvious in the tension of his jaw. You'd be smart to take the deal. Cut your losses. This was always going to end badly. Dominic shifted by the window but said nothing. Vincent was very carefully studying his laptop screen. Celine's mind raced. Testify against Cassian and she'd be free. New life, new name, safety from prosecution. Her mother would be cared for. Witness protection included family members. They could disappear together, start over somewhere warm and boring, where organized crime was just something on television. All she had to do was destroy the man she'd fallen in love with. What would you testify to? Cassian asked, and there was something broken in his voice now. Everything? Or just enough to satisfy them? Does it matter? Yes. He leaned forward and she saw his hands were shaking. Because if you're going to betray me, Celine, I need to know how completely you're willing to do it. The word betray hit like a physical blow, because that's what it would be. Not justice, not escape. Betrayal of the highest order, using what he'd shared with her, the intimacy and trust, to put him in a cage for the rest of his life. I don't know, she whispered. Yes, you do. He stood, moved around the table until he was standing over her. You're smart enough to have already made the calculation. Your freedom versus my life. That's an easy choice for most people. I'm not most people. No, you're mine. His hand cupped her face, gentle despite everything. Or you were until about 20 seconds ago when you started considering Vincent's suggestion. I didn't. Don't lie. I can see it in your eyes. You're already planning your testimony, already deciding which secrets to sell for your freedom. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. Can't say I blame you. I'd probably do the same thing. Celine jerked away from his touch. You're trying to manipulate me. I'm trying to survive. There's a difference. He turned to Vincent. Set it up. Contact whoever you need to contact. Tell them Celine Vale wants to make a deal. Boss, do it. Vincent hesitated, then nodded and left the room, pulling out his phone. Dominic followed, giving them privacy for whatever came next. Alone, Cassian and Celine stared at each other across the space where their entire relationship had just imploded. You're really going to let me testify, she said. What choice do I have? Chain you in the basement until you agree to stay loyal? His laugh was bitter. I thought about it, but that's not love. That's just ownership. And I'm tired of owning you, Celine. I want you to choose me. You want me to choose prison, to throw away my life for yours. Yes, raw honesty. That's exactly what I want, because I love you, and love is selfish and cruel and it demands sacrifice. That's not love. Then what is? He moved closer, crowding her against the table. Tell me, since you seem to have figured it out, what's love supposed to look like? Comfortable? Safe? Easy? His hands braced on either side of her, caging her in. Love is terrifying. It's giving someone the power to destroy you and trusting they won't. And right now you have that power. You could end me with a phone call. So could you. You could have let my mother die. You could have refused to pay for her treatment when she had that complication. She stopped. The words died in her throat as understanding crashed over her like ice water. Cassian saw it happen, saw the moment she connected the dots. His expression went carefully blank. No, Celine breathed. You didn't. Celine. The complication, the internal bleeding, that wasn't random, was it? Her voice was rising now, panic and fury mixing into something volcanic. You did something. You hurt her to teach me a lesson about defying you. I would never. Liar! The scream tore out of her throat. She shoved him hard, and he stumbled back, more from surprise than force. You hurt my mother because I said no to having your baby. You almost killed her to prove you could. That's not what happened. Then what did happen? She was crying now, angry tears streaming down her face. Tell me the truth. For once in your life, tell me the fucking truth. Cassian's composure cracked. Fine. You want the truth? I had her medication adjusted. Nothing dangerous, just a reaction, enough to scare you, enough to remind you what was at stake. He ran a hand through his hair. But it went wrong. The bleeding was unintended. I swear I never meant for it to get that bad. Celine couldn't breathe. The room was spinning, the floor dropping out from under her. He'd admitted it, actually admitted to hurting her mother, to deliberately causing the complication that had nearly killed her. You're a monster, she whispered. I know. I loved you. I know that too. His eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. And you can hate me for what I did. You should hate me. But don't pretend you're going to testify because of moral principles. If you do it because you're choosing yourself over me. At least be honest about that. The front door slammed. Vincent's voice called out, We have a problem. They both turned as Vincent came running in, laptop abandoned, face white with fear. They found the safe house. I don't know how, but they're coming. We have maybe 10 minutes. That's impossible, Cassian said. This location is compromised. I'm telling you, they're coming. State police, federal agents, the whole convoy. Vincent was already moving toward the back exit. We need to go now. Dominic appeared with bags already packed. Cars are ready, boss. We need to move. Everything happened fast after that. They were running through the woods, branches tearing at Celine's clothes, her lungs burning. Behind them, she could hear sirens getting closer, see lights through the trees. They reached a second car, this one hidden in a makeshift garage half a mile from the cabin, and piled in. Dominic drove like a man possessed. They took back roads, dirt paths that barely qualified as roads, bouncing over ruts and through streams. The sirens faded but never disappeared completely. Where are we going? Celine gasped out. Plan C, Cassian said grimly. The boat. They drove for 3 hours, pushing north and east, until they hit the coast near a small fishing town that looked like it had died decades ago. The boat was waiting at a private dock, not a yacht, but a serious vessel, something that could handle open water. 2 men waited on deck, both armed, both looking nervous. She's fueled and ready, one of them said as Cassian climbed aboard. But boss, the Coast Guard's been patrolling heavy. They might have your description. Then we leave before they find us. Cassian turned to help Celine aboard, and she realized with cold clarity that she was actually about to flee the country with a criminal. That this was real, happening, irreversible. Wait, she said. My mother, where's Victor? Where's my mother? Cassian's expression was answer enough. No. She backed away from his outstretched hand. No, you said she'd be safe. You promised. Victor was intercepted, Vincent said quietly, climbing aboard behind them. Federal agents got to the ambulance before it cleared the city. Your mother's in federal custody now. They're using her as leverage to find you. The world tilted. Celine grabbed the railing to keep from falling. They'll hurt her, she said. If I don't turn myself in, they'll use her medical condition for leverage, Cassian said. But they won't let her die. She's too valuable as bait. He was trying to sound reassuring and failing. We get clear of U.S. waters, get to one of my properties overseas, and then we negotiate. Trade information for your mother's safety. You mean trade me? The realization was crystal clear. You want me to testify anyway, just on your terms. Give them enough to get my mother released, but not enough to actually hurt you. His silence was confirmation. Celine looked around at the boat, at the men with guns, at the dark water stretching toward a horizon she couldn't see. Behind them, maybe miles away, maybe closer, federal agents were hunting them. Her mother was in custody, probably terrified, definitely being used as a pawn. And Cassian wanted her to trust him to fix this. Cassian, who'd hurt her mother to maintain control. Cassian, who'd manipulated her from the beginning. Cassian, who was still trying to own her even as everything burned down. I need a minute, she said. To think. We don't have a minute. Give me a fucking minute, her voice echoed across the dock. Cassian nodded slowly, then gestured for everyone to give them space. The armed men moved to the far end of the boat. Vincent and Dominic climbed back onto the dock. Alone, or as alone as they could be, Cassian and Celine faced each other across a divide that had nothing to do with physical distance. Tell me what you're thinking, he said quietly. I'm thinking that every choice I've made since meeting you has been the wrong one. I'm thinking my mother's in federal custody because I was selfish enough to want her to live. I'm thinking, her voice broke, I'm thinking I can't trust you. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. Fair. That's it? Just fair? What do you want me to say? His hands spread helplessly. That I'm sorry. I am. That I do things differently? I wouldn't. I'd make the same choices again because they kept you alive and close to me. That's all I've ever wanted. You wanted to own me. Yes. And I wanted you to want to be owned. Wanted you to love me enough that the cage felt like home. He took a step closer. But I failed. Because you're standing here looking at me like I'm the enemy, and maybe I always was. Maybe you were right before. Maybe this was never love, just obsession that looked like it from certain angles. Celine felt something inside her chest shatter. Because he was wrong. It had been love, twisted and toxic and born from manipulation, but love nonetheless. She'd fallen for him completely, and that made this so much worse. I have to turn myself in, she said. It's the only way to get my mother released. They'll destroy you. 30 years minimum, Celine. You'll be 50 before you see daylight again. I know. And you're willing to sacrifice your entire life. For my mother? Yes. In a heartbeat. She met his eyes. That's what real love looks like, Cassian. Sacrifice without ownership, giving without taking, everything you never learned how to do. The words hit him like bullets. She watched him absorb each one, saw the way his expression closed off, shutting down whatever vulnerability he'd been showing. Fine, he said flatly. If that's your choice. It is. Then I won't stop you. He pulled out one of the encrypted phones and held it out. Call whoever you need to call. Arrange the surrender. I'll make sure your mother gets the best care while you're... He couldn't finish the sentence. Celine took the phone, their fingers brushing. The contact felt like goodbye. She dialed the number Vincent had found earlier, the FBI field office handling the Moretti case. A woman answered on the second ring. This is Special Agent Sarah Chen. My name is Celine Vale, she said, surprised her voice was steady. I understand you're looking for me. Silence on the other end. Then, Miss Vale, where are you? Somewhere safe, for now. I want to make a deal. She looked at Cassian while she talked. Full immunity in exchange for testimony. And I want my mother released from custody immediately. Those are my terms. I'll need to run this up the chain. You have 2 hours. After that, I disappear, and you'll never find me. She ended the call. Cassian stared at her. You're really doing this? Did you think I wouldn't? I hoped. He moved to the railing, looking out at the dark water. I hoped that when it came down to it, you'd choose me over everything else. Stupid, I know. Narcissistic, definitely. But I hoped, anyway. Celine wanted to hate him. Wanted to feel nothing but contempt for the man who'd trapped and manipulated her. But standing there, watching his shoulders curve inward, seeing the defeat in every line of his body, all she felt was grief. I did love you, she said quietly. For what it's worth. Past tense, noted. Cassian, don't. He turned back to face her. Don't apologize. Don't explain. You made your choice. I respect it, even if it destroys me. The phone rang, Agent Chen calling back faster than expected. We have a deal, she said. Full immunity, your mother released tonight, but we need you to come in now. And Miss Vale, a pause. We know Cassian Moretti is with you. If you bring him in too, we can offer even better terms. Witness protection, new identities for you and your mother, financial support. Celine looked at Cassian. He'd heard every word. The phone's speaker was loud enough that everyone on the boat probably heard. He stood very still, watching her, waiting to see if she'd complete the betrayal. Where do you want me? Celine asked, not breaking eye contact with Cassian. There's a Coast Guard station 20 miles north of your current position. We're sending a helicopter to pick you up. Chen's voice was carefully neutral. Come alone. and we'll process you quickly. Bring Moretti, and we'll make sure your mother has the best medical care money can buy for the rest of her life." It was a good offer. Great offer, actually. Everything she could possibly want. All she had to do was sell out the man she loved. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, Celine said. "Alone." "Miss Vale." She ended the call and powered down the phone. Cassian exhaled slowly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I'm still testifying. I'm still going to tell them everything I know. Just not my location. Not where I'm going after you leave." He moved closer. "That's something, at least. It's all you're getting." They stood facing each other on the gently rocking boat, while the crew pretended not to listen, and the night pressed in from all sides. This was goodbye. Real, final, permanent goodbye. "I need you to promise me something," Cassian said. "Whatever they offer you, whatever deals they make, don't let them take away your mother's medical care. Make it ironclad, non-negotiable. That's the one good thing I did in this whole mess, keeping her alive. Don't let them undo it." "I won't. And Celine," his voice cracked, "try not to hate me too much. Some of it was real. Maybe not the beginning, but the middle. The part where I fell for you, that was real." She wanted to say she'd try, wanted to offer comfort, but lies felt wrong now, and the truth was too complicated to voice. Instead, she stood on her toes and kissed him. Soft, brief, tasting like salt and regret. A goodbye kiss that held everything they'd never say out loud. When she pulled back, Cassian's eyes were wet. "Go," he said roughly, "before I do something stupid like beg you to stay." Dominic drove her to the Coast Guard station. They didn't speak. What was there to say? He knew she was about to destroy everything he'd worked for. She knew he'd kill her himself if Cassian gave the order. But the order hadn't come, so he drove in silence and let her walk away when they reached the station. The helicopter was waiting. Federal agents in tactical gear surrounded her the moment she stepped out of the car, guns drawn, shouting orders. She raised her hands and let them cuff her, let them search her, let them shove her into the helicopter's cargo hold. As they lifted off, she caught one last glimpse of the fishing town below. The boat was gone, disappeared into the dark water like it had never existed. Cassian was gone. That part of her life, brief and intense and catastrophic, was over. The helicopter ride felt endless. She was delivered to a federal building in a city she didn't recognize, processed like a criminal, fingerprinted and photographed and locked in an interrogation room that smelled like industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Agent Chen arrived an hour later with another agent, a man in his 40s with hard eyes. "Miss Vale," Chen said, sitting across from her, "thank you for coming in. Before we begin, I need to inform you that this conversation is being recorded and anything you say can and will be used in court. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Good. Let's start with the basics. How long have you been working for the Moretti organization?" 6 months, almost exactly." "And in that time, what was your role?" Celine took a breath and started talking. She told them everything: the contracts, the ledgers, the meetings with criminals and judges and politicians. She told them about Marco's theft and how she'd found the evidence. She described the structure of the organization, named names, provided details that would take months to verify, but would ultimately lead to dozens of arrests. She gave them everything except Cassian's location. Hours passed. They brought her food she couldn't eat, water she forced down. Chen took notes, asked follow-up questions, pressed for details. The other agent, his name was Miller, focused on Cassian specifically. "Tell us about your relationship with him," Miller said. "Were you romantically involved?" Celine hesitated. "Yes." "Coerced?" "It's complicated." "Make it simple." How did you explain obsessive love that started as manipulation but became real?" "He pursued me, aggressively, but I wasn't entirely unwilling." "Did he ever threaten you?" "Implicitly, by controlling my mother's medical care, by making it clear that leaving meant her death." "So you were coerced." "I told you, it's complicated." Miller leaned forward. "Miss Vale, we need to establish whether you were a willing participant in these crimes or a victim. Your testimony's value depends on your credibility. If you were in love with Moretti, cooperating willingly, that makes you look like an accomplice turning on her partner to save herself. But if you were coerced, trapped, forced to participate, that makes you a victim. Which is it? The question hung in the air. Celine realized with cold clarity that they wanted her to paint Cassian as a monster who'd forced her into everything, that her best chance at immunity required her to completely villainize the man she'd loved. And maybe he was a monster. He'd hurt her mother, manipulated her from the beginning, owned her in every way that mattered. But he'd also loved her. In his broken, possessive way, he'd loved her. Both, she said finally. I was coerced, and I loved him. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. Miller and Chen exchanged glances. All right, Chen said. Let's talk about specific incidents, starting with Marco's disappearance. They interrogated her for 12 hours straight. By the end, Celine's voice was hoarse, and her eyes burned with exhaustion. But she'd given them everything they needed to dismantle the Moretti Empire. Arrests would be made, people would go to prison. The organization that Cassian's family had spent generations building would crumble. And it was her fault, her testimony, her betrayal. We'll be in touch, Chen said finally. In the meantime, you'll be placed in protective custody until the trial. For your safety. What about my mother? Already arranged. She was released 2 hours ago and is being transported to a secure medical facility. You'll be able to visit her once we've confirmed there are no immediate threats. Relief flooded through her. Thank you. Don't thank us yet. The trial won't be easy. Moretti's attorneys will tear you apart on the stand. They'll paint you as a liar, a scorned lover, someone who turned on him out of spite. Chen's expression was sympathetic but firm. You'll need to be strong. Celine almost laughed. Strong. She'd forgotten what that felt like. They moved her to a safe house, different from Cassian's, this one sanitized and government-issued. She was given a room with a bed and a window she couldn't open. Guards outside, monitoring equipment she couldn't see but knew was there. She lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling and tried to remember who she'd been before Cassian Moretti. That girl who'd scrubbed floors and dreamed of college and believed in simple things like right and wrong. That girl was gone, dead and buried beneath 6 months of moral compromise. The person lying in this safe house bed was someone else entirely. Someone who'd loved a monster and betrayed him to save herself. Someone who'd gotten her mother back but lost her soul in the process. Celine closed her eyes and tried to sleep. Failed. Opened them again and watched shadows move across the ceiling. Somewhere out there, Cassian was running. Probably out of the country by now, hidden in whatever bolt holes he'd prepared for this exact scenario. He'd disappear, reinvent himself, maybe rebuild under a different name in a different place. And she'd spend the next year preparing to destroy him in court, to stand on a witness stand and recount every crime, every manipulation, every moment of the toxic love story they'd created together. The phone they'd given her, new number, monitored, buzzed with a text. Unknown sender. Her heart stopped. She knew who it was before she opened the message. You testified. I heard. Good. Save yourself. Just remember, I loved you. Past tense or not, it was real. That's not testimony, just truth. No signature. The number was probably a burner, already destroyed. But she'd know that voice anywhere, even in text form. She should report it immediately. Show the agents, let them trace it, use it to track him down. Instead, she deleted it and lay back down. Because whatever Cassian Moretti was, monster, criminal, the man who'd ruined her life, he was also right about one thing. It had been real. And that made everything so much worse. 3 weeks later, they moved her to a different safe house after intelligence suggested Cassian's associates might have found the first location. Then another move 2 weeks after that. She lived like a ghost, seeing only guards and lawyers, preparing for a trial that kept getting postponed as prosecutors built their case. Her mother was stable, improving even, but Celine only saw her through video calls. Too dangerous to meet in person, they said. Too easy for Cassian to track. The lawyers prepped her endlessly, rehearsed questions, practiced responses, taught her how to project credibility on the stand. They showed her photos of Cassian's victims, people who'd been killed or destroyed by the organization she'd been part of, tried to harden her resolve. It worked mostly. Until they showed her a photo of Cassian himself, taken during his arrest in absentia. He looked older, harder, nothing like the man who'd kissed her goodbye on that boat. This is the man you're testifying against, one lawyer said. Remember that. Not the person you thought you loved, the criminal who manipulated you. But that distinction had never been as clear as they wanted it to be. 6 months after her surrender, the trial finally started. She was transported to the courthouse in an armored vehicle, hustled through back entrances, surrounded by guards. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, curious citizens, people who wanted to see the Moretti Empire fall. Cassian wasn't there. Still at large, being tried in absentia. But his attorneys were, and they looked at her with open contempt. When her name was called, Celine stood on legs that barely held her and walked to the witness stand, raised her right hand, swore to tell the truth. And then she began to speak. She told them everything, every detail, every crime, every moment of the 6 months she'd spent inside Cassian's world. The prosecutors were pleased. The defense attorneys circled like sharks, but she held her ground. On the third day of her testimony, during a recess, one of the guards pulled her aside. "There's someone asking to see you," he said quietly. "Claims to be your lawyer. Different firm than the prosecution's using. Should I send them away?" "Ma'am, he says it's urgent. About your mother." Panic flared. "What about my mother?" "He'll only talk to you." She was led to a small conference room, still surrounded by guards. A man in an expensive suit stood waiting, late 50s, silver hair, the kind of face that suggested ruthless competence. "Miss Vale," he said, "my name is James Hawthorne. I represent certain interests that have a stake in this trial's outcome. If you're one of Cassian's people, I'm not. I represent someone else entirely, someone who has information you need to hear before you continue testifying. I'm not interested. Your mother's illness wasn't natural." Hawthorne said it flatly, no preamble. "The cancer, it was induced." Celine's world stopped. "What?" 18 months ago, someone poisoned your mother. Slow-acting carcinogen, carefully dosed, designed to cause cancer that would seem spontaneous. He pulled out a folder, slid it across the table. "We have proof. Medical records, toxicology reports, everything." She stared at the folder like it might explode. Who? Who would? Cassian Moretti. The name landed like a bomb. Celine couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what he was saying. "That's impossible. I didn't even know him 18 months ago." "No, but he knew you." Hawthorne opened the folder, showed her surveillance photos. Celine in her old apartment, at her community college, working at a diner she'd forgotten about. All dated 18 months before she'd ever cleaned the Moretti estate. "He'd been watching you for over a year," Hawthorne continued. "Planned the whole thing, poisoned your mother to make her sick, waited for you to get desperate, then arranged for you to be hired at his estate. Everything, the contracts, the medical care, your entire relationship, was orchestrated from the beginning." Celine felt reality cracking apart. Why? Why would he do that? Because he's obsessed with control. Because he saw you and decided he wanted you, and the best way to ensure your loyalty was to create a problem only he could solve. Hawthorne's expression was cold. "You were never saving your mother, Miss Vale. You were just undoing the poison Cassian administered in the first place." The folder slipped from her numb fingers, pages scattered across the table, medical charts, chemical analysis, surveillance photos that proved she'd been Cassian's target long before that first night in the bloody dining room. Everything was a lie, all of it. Not just the manipulation she'd known about, but the foundational crisis that had driven her into his arms. He'd created her desperation deliberately, systematically, with the patience of someone playing a long game. "No," she whispered. "He loved me. Whatever else was false, that was real." "Was it?" Hawthorne gestured to the scattered evidence. "Or was that manipulation too? A man who'd poisoned someone's mother to manufacture leverage isn't capable of love, Miss Vale. Only possession." Celine's stomach heaved. She barely made it to the trash can before vomiting, her body rejecting this new reality. When she finally looked up, Hawthorne was watching her with something like pity. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this," he said, "but you deserve to know the truth before you finish testifying, before you protect him with anything less than complete honesty about what he is." "Who are you?" she asked hoarsely. "Why are you showing me this?" "I told you, I represent interested parties. Let's leave it at that." He collected his folder, leaving the copies for her, and stood to leave. "Miss Vale," he said at the door, "finish your testimony. Tell them everything. Don't hold back out of some misguided loyalty to a man who poisoned your mother to own you." Then he was gone, and Celine was alone with evidence of a betrayal so profound it made everything before seem like kindness. The guards came back eventually, found her sitting on the floor surrounded by scattered photos and medical charts, crying so hard she couldn't breathe. They called for a recess, gave her time to compose herself. But how do you compose yourself after learning that your entire life for the past 2 years had been a lie? That evening, back in the safe house, Celine sat in the dark and tried to understand. Cassian had poisoned her mother, had watched her suffer and struggle and work herself to death trying to afford treatment, had let it go on for months before swooping in like a savior, and she'd fallen for it, fallen for him, given him her loyalty, her body, her heart. The phone they'd given her sat on the table, monitored and traced. She stared at it for a long time before picking it up and composing a text. Not to anyone the FBI would approve of. To a number she'd memorized but never called. The encrypted phone Cassian had given her that first week, before she'd even understood what she was becoming. She'd turned it over to the FBI, but she remembered the number. "Did you poison my mother?" She hit send before she could stop herself. No response. Of course not. That phone was probably at the bottom of an ocean by now, destroyed along with all evidence of Cassian's careful planning. But 5 minutes later, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered without thinking. "Hello, Celine." Cassian's voice, slightly distorted by encryption or distance, but unmistakably him. "I heard you're having a hard time with your testimony." Answer the question. Silence. Long enough that she thought he might just hang up. Then, "Yes." The admission knocked the air from her lungs. "Why?" Her voice broke on the word. "Because I wanted you, and you would never have come to me willingly, so I created circumstances where you had no choice." His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, like he was describing the weather. "I'm not going to apologize, Celine. I did what I had to do to make you mine. You gave my mother cancer, I gave her a condition that required expensive treatment, that made you desperate enough to accept my help. That made you dependent on me." A pause. "And it worked, didn't it? You came. You stayed. You fell in love with me. I hate you." "You've said that before too." His voice softened slightly. "But you're still on the phone, still listening, because part of you needs to understand why I do something so terrible. There is no understanding this." "There is, because you've felt it now. That consuming need to control someone, to own them so completely they can't imagine life without you." His breath caught. "That's what I felt the first time I saw you. Walking to your college, smiling at something on your phone, looking so goddamn beautiful in the afternoon light that I knew I had to have you." Celine was crying again, ugly sobs that made it hard to breathe. "You're sick. I'm in love. There's not much difference." Don't you dare call this love. What else would you call it? I destroyed my own empire for you, burned everything I'd spent my life building because losing you was worse than losing everything else. If that's not love, Celine, then tell me what is." She couldn't answer. Because he was wrong, obviously, toxically wrong. Love didn't poison people's mothers. Love didn't manipulate and control and destroy. But then, what had she felt for him? That desperate, consuming thing that had made her stay despite everything, was that love either, or just another kind of sickness? "I'm going to finish testifying," she said finally. "I'm going to tell them everything, including the poisoning." "I know. They'll hunt you forever. You'll never be safe." "I know that too." He sounded tired. "But at least you'll be free. Your mother will live. The poisoning had a reversible component. Once she stopped being exposed, her body started healing. She'll be fine, Celine. You saved her, just like I knew you would." "You're insane." "Probably." A pause. "For what it's worth, I really did love you. The rest was manipulation, but that part, the falling, the needing, the desperate, consuming want, that was real. It doesn't matter." "No, I suppose it doesn't." His voice was barely a whisper now. "Goodbye, Celine. Try not to hate yourself too much for loving me. You couldn't have known." "Cassian." The line went dead. Celine sat in the dark with a disconnected phone and the crushing weight of understanding. She had loved him, despite everything, because of everything, in the twisted way that trauma bonds look like love from the inside. And he'd loved her too, in the only way he was capable of. Possessive and destructive and poisonous. They'd ruined each other, created something toxic and mistaken it for devotion. The next day, she returned to the stand. The prosecutors asked about her relationship with Cassian, and she told them. All of it. The poisoning, the manipulation, the systematic destruction of her free will disguised as romance. The courtroom erupted. Cassian's attorneys called for a mistrial. The judge called for order. Journalists rushed to file stories about the criminal who'd poisoned a woman's mother to force her daughter into his bed. It was a scandal, a nightmare, the kind of story that would be told for years as a cautionary tale. And through it all, Celine sat on the witness stand and answered questions with a voice that didn't feel like hers anymore. The trial lasted 3 more weeks. In the end, Cassian was convicted in absentia on 47 counts, including conspiracy, murder, racketeering, and chemical poisoning. Sentenced to multiple life terms he'd never served because he was gone, vanished into whatever hiding places men like him prepared for this exact scenario. Celine got her immunity, her mother got her health. They were relocated under new names to a quiet town where no one knew who they were or what they'd survived. It should have been a happy ending. Instead, Celine woke up every morning in a stranger's house with a stranger's name, looking at her healthy mother who'd almost died because of her daughter's obsessive appeal to a monster. She'd saved her mother, but she'd lost herself in the process, became something hard and broken, incapable of trust, haunted by the ghost of a man who'd loved her enough to destroy everything. 6 months after the trial, a package arrived. No return address, postmarked from somewhere in South America. Inside was a single item, the engagement ring Cassian had offered her the night the federal raid began. The diamond that had rolled under her dresser and been forgotten in the chaos. No note, just the ring. Celine held it up to the light, watching it catch and throw colors across her kitchen walls. A promise that had never been fulfilled. A future that had burned before it began. She should throw it away, sell it, donate it to charity. Instead, she put it in a box in the back of her closet and tried to forget it existed, tried and failed. Because some prisons had nothing to do with bars or guards. Some prisons were made of memory and regret, and the terrible knowledge that you'd loved someone who'd destroyed you. And those prisons never set you free, no matter how far you ran. 3 years. That's how long Celine had been living under the name Sarah Mitchell in a town so small it didn't have a Starbucks. 3 years of pretending to be someone else, working at a library, watching her mother tend a garden that bloomed with flowers neither of them could name in their old life. 3 years of lying awake at night, reaching for a phone that didn't exist anymore, almost texting a number she'd memorized but never saved. 3 years of checking over her shoulder every time a black car drove past. The nightmares came less frequently now, only a few times a week instead of nightly. Progress, her mandated therapist said. Healing, she called it. Celine didn't bother correcting her. You couldn't heal from something that had fundamentally altered your DNA. You just learned to function around the damage. It was a Tuesday, boring, ordinary, the kind of day that made her forget she'd ever been anyone else. When Catherine collapsed in the garden, Celine heard the sound from inside. Not a scream, just a heavy thump followed by silence. She dropped the book she'd been cataloging and ran, found her mother face down in the tomato plants, not breathing, lips already turning blue. No, no, no! Her hands shook as she rolled Catherine over, started CPR the way she'd learned years ago but never thought she'd need. Compressions, counting, breathing into her mother's mouth. Come on, Mom, don't do this. The ambulance took 18 minutes. 18 minutes of Celine screaming into a phone while trying to keep her mother alive. When the paramedics finally arrived, they took over with efficient calm that made her want to scream louder. In the back of the ambulance, watching EMTs work, Celine saw the monitor, saw her mother's heart rhythm doing something wrong, saw the looks the paramedics exchanged. At the hospital, doctors used words like massive coronary event and significant damage and we're doing everything we can, code words that meant her mother was dying. How? Celine demanded. She was healthy. The cancer's been gone for years. How does she just, Sometimes these things happen, the doctor said with practiced sympathy. She had risk factors, the previous illness, the treatments. Her heart was weakened. Bullshit. The word came out flat. Test her for everything. Toxins, poisons. Anything that could cause this. The doctor's expression shifted. Miss Mitchell, I understand you're upset, but there's no indication of foul play. Test her, now, or I'll make a phone call you really don't want me to make. Something in her voice must have convinced him. He ordered a full toxicology panel. Celine sat beside her mother's ICU bed, holding a hand that felt too cold, and tried to breathe through the panic. This wasn't supposed to happen. They'd escaped, made a new life. They were supposed to be safe. Her phone buzzed. The secure one the FBI had given her that only rang when her handler needed to check in. She stepped into the hallway to answer. Sarah, it's Chen. Agent Chen, still monitoring her even after all this time. I heard about your mother. I'm sorry. How did you? Of course, they were always watching. She's dying. I know. Listen, we're running enhanced security protocols. This could be coincidence, but given your history, it's not coincidence. Celine's grip tightened on the phone. He found us. Cassian found us. We don't know that. Yes, we do. Just like last time, another mysterious medical crisis, right when... She stopped. Right when what? There was no leverage anymore. Nothing Cassian could gain from hurting her mother now, except revenge. We're sending a team, Chen said. They'll be there in 4 hours. In the meantime, hospital security has been alerted. You're safe, Sarah. I haven't been Sarah in my head for 3 years, and I've never been safe. She hung up and went back inside. The toxicology results came back 2 hours later. The doctor's face was pale when he delivered them. There are traces of several compounds in her system. Nothing that should be there. He looked genuinely disturbed. Someone did this to her, deliberately. The world tilted. Celine had to grip the bed rail to stay upright. Can you reverse it? We're trying, but whoever did this used sophisticated chemistry. We're not even sure what all the compounds are yet. How long? His silence was answer enough. How long? Celine repeated, voice cracking. Hours. Maybe a day if we're lucky. She sat down hard in the chair beside the bed. Catherine was unconscious, breathing with the help of machines, dying from poison administered by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone who'd done this before. The FBI team arrived before Chen's 4-hour estimate. 2 agents she didn't recognize, and Agent Miller from the original case. They swept the hospital, interviewed staff, turned her mother's room into a secured zone. We're pulling surveillance from every camera in a 50-mile radius, Miller told her. If someone was here, we'll find them. You won't. Celine stared at her mother's unconscious face. He's too careful, always has been. You think this is Moretti? Who else? He's been off the grid for 3 years. Interpol, FBI, CIA. Everyone's been looking. No sightings, no communications, nothing. Why surface now? Because he's insane. She looked up at Miller. Or because I finally convinced myself I was free, and he couldn't have that. Her phone buzzed again. Not the FBI phone, her personal one. The one only 2 people had the number for, both of them in this hospital. Unknown number, text message. I'm sorry about your mother, but you need to understand something, Celine. I didn't do this. Her blood turned to ice. She showed Miller, who immediately started tracing the message. But Celine knew it was pointless. Cassian was too smart for simple traces. Another text. I know you won't believe me, but I'm telling the truth. This wasn't me. Her hands shook as she typed back. Then who? The response came immediately. The people I stole you from. The ones who've been waiting 3 years for you to stop being useful to the FBI. The ones who want revenge for what your testimony did to their organization. Celine looked at Miller. Who took over the Moretti organization after Cassian disappeared? It fragmented, several smaller groups fighting for territory. Vincent Chen tried to hold it together, but... His eyes widened. You think this is retaliation? Cassian does. And you believe him? Did she? 3 years ago, she'd learned he poisoned her mother. That everything was manipulation. Why would she believe anything he said now? But something in her gut, that terrible instinct that had kept her alive in his world, said he was telling the truth. Another text. They're coming for you next, tonight. The hospital isn't as secure as your FBI friends think. You need to run, now. Tell me where you are, she typed back. Why? Because if you're telling the truth, if you didn't do this, Then you're the only one who can help me stop them. Long pause. Then, there's a car in the parking garage, level 3, northeast corner, black sedan, keys under the driver's mat. Be there in 10 minutes, alone. Miller was reading over her shoulder. That's a trap. Maybe. Definitely. You can't seriously be considering. My mother is dying from poison administered by someone who knows how we disappeared. Someone with resources and reach and a reason to want me dead. Celine stood. The FBI couldn't keep us safe. What makes you think you can protect me from whatever's coming next? We have protocols. Your protocols didn't prevent this. She grabbed her jacket. I'm going. You leave this hospital, you're on your own. We can't protect you if you run. You can't protect me anyway. She walked out before he could stop her, took the stairs instead of the elevator, moved fast through corridors that suddenly felt too exposed. Every person she passed could be an assassin. Every doctor could be carrying poison instead of medicine. The parking garage was dimly lit, security cameras blinking in corners. Level 3, northeast corner. The black sedan was exactly where Cassian said it would be, unremarkable except for the fact that its existence meant he'd been planning this. Watching. Waiting for the moment she'd need him. Keys under the mat. Engine started smoothly. No bomb. She half expected one. Her phone rang the moment she pulled out of the parking space. Drive north, Cassian's voice said. Stay off highways. I'll guide you. Where am I going? Somewhere safe, or as safe as anywhere can be right now. Why should I trust you? Because 3 years ago, I could have killed your mother at any time. Could have killed you. Could have made your testimony meaningless by eliminating the witness. His voice was steady, matter of fact. But I didn't. Because despite everything you think about me, I loved you. Still do. And that means keeping you alive even when you hate me for it. Celine's throat tightened. You gave her cancer. Yes. And now she's dying anyway. Not if I can help it. Take the next left. She followed his directions through a maze of back roads, watching the rearview mirror for tails. Nothing. Either she'd slipped away clean or whoever was following was better than she could spot. Talk to me, she said. Tell me what's happening. Vincent survived the organization's collapse, built something new from the pieces. Smaller, meaner, more desperate. He blamed you for everything, the testimony, the raids, my disappearance. He's been hunting you for 3 years. Why wait until now? Because you were useful. Your testimony put away dozens of people he considered rivals. Every conviction made him stronger. But now the trials are done. You've served your purpose, and Vincent doesn't leave loose ends. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. He poisoned my mother to draw me out, to make me vulnerable. Yes. And when the FBI couldn't save her, when you were desperate and scared, you'd do something stupid. Like meet with me, like leave protective custody. Cassian's voice was grim. You're exactly where he wants you, Celine, exposed and alone. Except I'm not alone, I'm with you. That's what he's counting on. He thinks I'll lead him to you and then he can kill us both. She took a sharp turn, tires squealing. So what's the plan? We disappear. Tonight. New identities, new country, completely off-grid. I have resources Vincent doesn't know about. And my mother? Silence. Cassian. My mother. The poison. There's an antidote. I can get it. But it takes time, and we don't have time. Vincent's people are already moving. Then we make time. Her hands were white-knuckled on the wheel. You don't get to save me and let her die. That's not how this works. Celine, you owe me this after everything you did. Everything you took from me, you owe me her life. His exhale was ragged. Okay, take the next right. We're going to get the antidote first, but after that, we run. No arguments. After that, we'll see. The address he gave her was a warehouse in an industrial district that looked abandoned, but probably wasn't. She parked behind a dumpster and sat with the engine running, every instinct screaming this was a trap. It's clear, Cassian's voice said in her ear. I've been watching for an hour. Come to the side entrance. She got out slowly, scanning shadows for movement. Saw nothing. Moved toward the entrance with her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The door opened before she reached it. Cassian stood in the doorway. 3 years. 3 years since she'd seen him in person, and he looked different. Thinner, harder. a scar along his jaw that hadn't been there before. His hair was longer, shot through with gray that made him look older than 33, but his eyes, those cold silver eyes, were exactly the same. "Hello, Celine." She couldn't speak, couldn't move. All the things she'd imagined saying if she ever saw him again died in her throat. "We don't have time for this," he said, stepping aside. "Come in, quickly." The warehouse interior was divided into makeshift rooms, living space apparently, because Cassian had been camping here. Supplies stacked against walls, a cot in one corner, weapons on a table that made her stomach turn. "The antidote," she managed. "You said you have it." He moved to a small refrigerator, pulled out a vial of clear liquid. "Synthesized it myself. It'll counteract the compounds Vincent used, but she needs it in the next few hours, or the damage becomes irreversible." Celine reached for it, but he pulled it back. "First, you need to understand what you're walking into. Vincent knows you left the hospital. He's got people everywhere, FBI, hospital staff, local police. The moment you try to go back, they'll be waiting. Then we call Chen, have her team administer it. Chen works for Vincent now." The words hit like a punch. "What?" "She's been on his payroll for 18 months. How do you think Vincent knew where to find you? How he got poison into a secured witness?" Cassian's expression was grim. She gave him everything. Your location, your mother's medical records, your security protocols. She's the reason we're in this mess. Celine's knees buckled. She caught herself on the table, sending a gun clattering to the floor. "Miller? What about Miller?" "Clean, as far as I know, but he can't help you. Chen's got too much pull." "Then what do we do?" "I go back, I administer the antidote. You stay here where it's safe." "Absolutely not. This isn't negotiable." He moved closer and she could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight of 3 years running. "They want me, Celine. They want you. But they want me more. I walk in there, I'm the distraction. Vincent's people focus on me, Miller gets your mother out, and you disappear before anyone realizes you were never there. That's suicide. That's the only play we have." "No." She grabbed his arm, felt muscle and bone under her fingers, solid and real. "There has to be another way." "There isn't, and we're wasting time arguing about it." He pulled free, started gathering weapons from the table. "Vincent will be at the hospital within the hour. He'll want to be there when they catch you. When they catch us. It's a statement, taking down the man who built the empire and the woman who destroyed it in the same night. So we give him what he wants. We both go in, together." Cassian stopped loading the gun in his hands and looked at her. Really looked at her, the way he used to before everything went to hell. "You really want to do this?" he asked quietly. "Walk back into that world? Risk everything? For my mother?" "Yes." "And for me?" The question hung between them, loaded with 3 years of silence and betrayal and the twisted remains of whatever they'd been to each other. "I don't know," Celine admitted. "But I know I can't let you die alone, even if I hate you, even if I should walk away right now and never look back." Something in his expression cracked. "You always were too loyal for your own good. Learned it from you." He laughed, sharp, bitter. "No, you didn't. I was never loyal to anyone but myself." He held out the vial. "But I'm about to be. Take this. If something happens to me, if Vincent's people get me before we reach your mother, you make sure she gets it. Understand?" Celine took the antidote, felt its weight in her palm. Life or death, in a small glass container. "How do we get in?" she asked. "Through the loading dock. There's a service entrance that connects to the hospital basement. Vincent won't expect us to come in together. He thinks you're still running, thinks I'm too smart to walk into a trap." Cassian's smile was sharp and mean. "We use that. Hit fast, hit hard, get to your mother's room before they can react. And then? Then we pray Miller is as clean as I think he is and can get us out before Vincent realizes what happened. It wasn't a good plan. It was barely a plan at all. But it was all they had. They took Cassian's car, another nondescript sedan that could blend into any parking lot. He drove with the efficiency of someone who'd spent 3 years staying invisible. She sat in the passenger seat with the antidote in her jacket pocket and a gun she didn't know how to use in her lap. "I should teach you to shoot," Cassian said, glancing at her awkward grip. "Bit late for that. Never too late to learn survival skills." He reached over, adjusted her hands on the weapon. The touch was brief, professional, and it still made her skin burn. Safety's here. Point and squeeze. Don't pull the trigger. Squeeze it smooth. And aim for center mass. Movies make headshots look easy. They're not. I can't believe I'm getting shooting lessons from you. I can't believe we're about to break into a hospital to stop my former consigliere from killing your mother and pinning it on me. Life's full of surprises. Despite everything, she almost smiled. They reached the hospital at midnight. The loading dock was dark, only one security camera blinking in the corner. Cassian produced a device from his pocket, aimed it at the camera. The light went dead. That won't last long, he said. 5 minutes before their system resets. Move. They went in fast. The service entrance was locked, but Cassian had it open in seconds. Inside was concrete and fluorescent lighting, the smell of industrial cleaner and old metal, corridors that led deeper into the hospital's infrastructure. You know this place, Celine whispered. I know every hospital within 200 miles. Had to, in case you needed emergency extraction. He turned a corner, checked for movement. Clear. This way. They moved through the basement like ghosts, past storage rooms and mechanical systems and locked doors marked with warnings. Cassian navigated with the confidence of someone who'd memorized the layout. 3 years preparing for a scenario he hoped would never come. The stairs to the main hospital were alarmed. Cassian bypassed them with the same device he'd used on the camera. Where'd you learn this? Celine asked. YouTube, mostly. Amazing what you can find online when you're bored and paranoid. They climbed 3 flights in silence. At each landing, Cassian paused to listen, to watch for movement. Nothing yet, but the clock was ticking, and Vincent's people would be converging soon. 4th floor. ICU. Catherine's room was at the end of the hall, still marked as a secured zone. But there were only 2 guards now instead of the 4 from earlier, and neither of them looked particularly alert. Chen pulled most of the security, Cassian murmured. She wants you vulnerable. How do we get past them? We don't. I go first, draw their attention. You slip in, administer the antidote, get your mother stable, then we figure out extraction. That's the only option. Now shut up and let me do this. He stepped into the hallway before she could argue. Hands raised, empty and visible. The guards saw him immediately, went for their weapons. Don't, Cassian called out. I'm unarmed. I'm here to turn myself in. Moretti? One guard spoke into his radio. We've got Moretti on 4. ICU wing, requesting immediate backup. Smart, Cassian said conversationally, walking closer. Vincent will want to be here for this. Make sure it's really me. Make sure I suffer appropriately. The guards kept their weapons trained on him. On your knees. Hands behind your head. Sure, but first, can I ask you something? He was almost to them now, close enough to strike. Do you know what Vincent's been telling you about me? Shut up and get down. Cassian moved. Fast, brutal, efficient. One guard went down with a broken nose before he could react. The other got a shot off, loud, deafening in the corridor. But Cassian was already inside his reach, disarming him with practiced violence. Celine ran. While Cassian fought both guards with the kind of controlled fury she remembered from those nights in the warehouse, she sprinted for her mother's room. The door was locked, secured by Chen's team, but Cassian had given her a key card lifted from one of Vincent's moles. It worked. The door opened. Catherine lay exactly as Celine had left her, machines breathing for her, monitors showing a heart rhythm that was barely holding. Her skin was gray, lips blue, dying cells shutting down one by one. I'm here, Mom. Celine's hands shook as she pulled out the antidote. I've got you. You're going to be okay. The vial had a syringe attached. Instructions written in Cassian's precise handwriting. IV injection, slow push, 15 seconds minimum. She found the IV port, uncapped the needle, tried to steady her shaking hands enough to inject properly. Behind her, gunfire erupted in the hallway. More than 2 guards now. Backup had arrived fast. Come on, she whispered, pushing the plunger. Clear liquid flowing into her mother's bloodstream. Come on, please work. Oh, the door burst open. Celine spun, gun coming up instinctively, and found herself pointing it at Agent Chen. Put it down, Sarah, Chen said. She had her own weapon drawn, aimed with steady confidence. Or should I call you Celine? Hard to keep track. You betrayed me. I did my job. Vincent pays better than the FBI. and he's more loyal to people who prove useful. Chen moved into the room, keeping her weapon trained. Now, put the gun down. Cassian's already finished out there. You're all alone. More gunfire from the hallway, shouting. A man's scream cut short. Doesn't sound finished to me, Celine said. Chen's expression flickered. Uncertainty. Vincent's people are probably dead. You have no idea what Cassian's capable of when someone threatens me. He doesn't care about you. He poisoned your mother 3 years ago to own me. Celine's finger tightened on the trigger. But you poisoned her this week to kill her. There's a difference. Vincent poisoned her. I just provided the access. That makes it better? That makes it business. Chen took another step closer. You were always a loose end, Celine. You testified, you disappeared, but you knew too much. Vincent couldn't let you live once you stopped being useful. So he sent you to finish it. He sent me to bring you in. The killing was supposed to be quick, painless. But you had to run. Had to contact Moretti. Had to make this complicated. Behind Chen, the door opened again. Vincent himself stood there, older than Celine remembered, gray at the temples, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than her yearly salary. He looked like a lawyer or a banker, not like someone who'd ordered a woman's murder. Hello, Celine, he said pleasantly. It's been a while. Chen stepped aside, giving Vincent clear line of sight. He had his own gun, held casually, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. I have to admit, I'm impressed, Vincent continued. You slipped our net, contacted Cassian, made it all the way here. That takes skill. Or desperation. Probably both. Where's Cassian? Celine asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Dead or dying, my people are very thorough. By now, the window exploded inward in a shower of glass. Cassian came through it. Impossible. They were 4 floors up. Attached to a rappelling line he must have set up while she was inside. He hit the ground rolling, came up firing, and Chen went down with a bullet in her shoulder. Vincent turned to shoot, but Celine was faster. She squeezed the trigger like Cassian taught her. Center mass, smooth pressure. The gun kicked hard against her palm. The shot went wide, hitting Vincent's gun instead of his body, sending the weapon spinning across the floor. Then Cassian was between them, his own gun pressed to Vincent's temple. Hello, old friend, Cassian said. Miss me? Vincent's face twisted with rage and fear. You're supposed to be dead. People keep trying that. It never takes. Cassian's eyes flicked to Celine. Your mother? Antidote's in, but we need to get her out of here, away from... She gestured vaguely at the chaos of broken glass and blood and armed people converging on their location. Working on it. Cassian's grip on Vincent didn't waver. How many people did you bring, Vincent? Enough to end you. Wrong answer. Cassian slammed Vincent's head into the wall, not hard enough to kill, but hard enough to stun. The older man crumpled, unconscious. Celine, we need to move. Now. She wanted to argue, wanted to wait until her mother showed signs of recovery, but monitors were already changing, heart rhythm steadying, blood pressure rising. The antidote was working, but Catherine was still unconscious, still dependent on machines. We can't move her? We don't have a choice. Cassian was already disconnecting monitors, preparing her mother for transport. Miller's downstairs with an ambulance. We get her to the loading dock, he takes her somewhere safe, and we disappear before Vincent's reinforcements arrive. Miller's here? Called him the moment we entered the building. Told him everything. Chen's betrayal, Vincent's plan, all of it. He's been organizing an extraction while we've been fighting our way in. Cassian lifted Catherine with surprising gentleness, cradling her like she might break. Lead the way. Shoot anyone who's not Miller. They ran. Through corridors filled with confused medical staff, past security guards who didn't know whether to help or hinder. Alarms screamed. Intercom voices called codes that meant violence was happening somewhere in this building. At the 2nd floor, Vincent's people found them. 3 men with serious weapons blocking the stairwell. Cassian set Catherine down carefully, handed Celine his backup gun. Stay behind me, he said. Then he moved. What followed was brutal and efficient. Cassian fought like violence was a language he spoke fluently, every movement precise, every strike calculated to disable rather than kill. One man went down with a crushed windpipe. Another took a bullet to the knee. The third managed to fire, bullet grazing Cassian's shoulder, but then Cassian had the man's own gun and was using it as a club. Celine could only watch, horrified and mesmerized. This was who Cassian Moretti really was underneath the suits and charm. This was the monster she'd fallen in love with. "Clear," Cassian gasped out, bleeding from his shoulder. "Go. Basement. Now." They made it to the loading dock through sheer momentum and luck. Miller was there with the ambulance exactly as promised, his face pale but determined. "Get her in," he shouted. "We've got maybe 2 minutes before—" The loading dock doors burst open. Federal agents in tactical gear, too many to count, weapons drawn and trained. And leading them was someone Celine recognized from years of testimony prep, the assistant director of the FBI, the man who'd overseen her entire case. "Nobody move," he commanded. Cassian froze with Catherine still in his arms. Celine raised her hands, gun still clutched in one fist. Miller looked between them and the tactical team, making calculations that came up empty. "Sir," Miller said carefully, "Agent Chen is compromised. She's been working with—" "I know, she's in custody upstairs." The AD's eyes fixed on Cassian. "Moretti, put down the woman and step away from the vehicle." "Can't do that," Cassian said. "This woman needs immediate medical attention. Your agent tried to kill her." "And you're going to save her? Forgive me if I find that hard to believe." "Believe what you want. But I'm getting her into this ambulance and we're leaving. You can shoot me after she's safe, but not before." The standoff stretched. 20 guns aimed at 3 people and 1 unconscious woman. The math was brutal. They'd all die here, and Catherine would still end up dead because no one would administer proper care in time. "Let them go," Celine said. Everyone looked at her. "I'll stay," she continued. "I'll cooperate fully, answer every question, testify to everything, including tonight. But they go, her and him." She gestured to her mother and Cassian. "That's my offer." "You're not in a position to negotiate." "Sure I am. I'm the one Vincent wanted dead, which means I'm the one who knows where all his new bodies are buried. Chen might have been his mole in the FBI, but I know his entire operation from the inside out." Her voice was steady now, certain. "Let them go, and I'll give you Vincent's empire on a silver platter." The AD considered. Behind him, tactical teams waited for orders that would determine whether this ended in bloodshed or sense. "Put the woman in the ambulance," he said finally. "Miller, you transport her to Mount Sinai with full protective detail." "Moretti is gone," Cassian interrupted. He'd already loaded Catherine into the ambulance, was backing toward the vehicle's rear doors. "Tell yourself you couldn't stop me. Tell yourself I overpowered your entire team. I don't care. But I'm leaving, and you're not going to shoot me because Celine just offered you something better." "Cassian?" Celine started. "Thank you," he said, meeting her eyes. "For saving her, for—" He stopped, unable to finish. Then, "I loved you. That part was always real." "I know." He climbed into the ambulance beside Catherine. "Miller, drive." Miller hesitated only a second before jumping into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life. The AD shouted orders, but Cassian slammed the rear doors shut, and the ambulance was moving, accelerating out of the loading dock before anyone could react. Gunfire erupted. Tactical teams shooting at the tires, trying to stop the vehicle without killing the patient inside. But Miller drove like his life depended on it, and within seconds the ambulance was gone, disappeared into the night. Celine stood surrounded by federal agents with her hands raised and her heart breaking. The AD approached her slowly. "You just let a wanted fugitive escape. I let my mother's life be saved by the only person capable of doing it." She lowered her hands. "Now take me into custody. I'll tell you everything, but I want immunity for my mother. Full protection, new identity, whatever she needs to survive what's left of Vincent's organization." "Done." "And Moretti? What about him? Will he contact you? Would he?" Celine didn't know anymore. 3 years ago, he'd let her walk away to testify against him. Tonight, he'd risked everything to save her mother. Maybe he was done with her now. Maybe this was his goodbye. Or maybe, somewhere in whatever hiding place he was headed to, he'd keep watching, keep waiting, keep hoping she'd forgive him enough to— "No," she lied. "He's gone for good this time." The AD didn't look convinced, but he nodded anyway. "Take her in. Full debrief, protective custody, the works. They cuffed her, gently but cuffed nonetheless, and led her to an armored vehicle. As they drove away from the hospital, Celine looked back once, saw the broken window on the 4th floor where Cassian had entered, saw the loading dock where she'd made the choice to let him go, wondered if she'd ever see him again, wondered if she wanted to. The vehicle turned a corner, and the hospital disappeared from view. Somewhere ahead, her mother was getting emergency care from a man who'd poisoned her years ago, but saved her tonight. The irony wasn't lost on Celine. Nothing about this was simple. Nothing had ever been simple where Cassian Moretti was concerned. "Where are we going?" she asked the agent beside her. "Secure location. You'll be safe there until we can verify Vincent's arrested and his organization dismantled. And after that, Miss Vale, you get to decide. New identity, fresh start, witness protection if you want it, or..." The agent paused. "Or you could come work for us. We could use someone who understands how these organizations work from the inside. Become an FBI agent. Hunt people like Cassian. Dismantle empires built on blood and fear." There was a certain symmetry to it. The maid who became a criminal becoming the law that prosecuted criminals. "I'll think about it," Celine said, but she was lying again. Because deep down, in the part of herself she tried to ignore, she knew what she really wanted. She wanted to find Cassian, wanted to understand why he kept saving her when she'd destroyed his life, wanted to know if 3 years of running had changed him the way 3 years of hiding had changed her, wanted to see if the twisted thing they'd called love could ever become something real. The vehicle drove through the night toward whatever future the FBI had planned for her. But Celine's mind was elsewhere, tracking an ambulance she'd never see again, following a man she should hate into the darkness he'd disappeared into. Some prisons, she'd realized 3 years ago, had nothing to do with bars. But tonight she'd learned something else. Some prisons had doors that only opened from the inside. And she was standing right at the threshold, hand on the handle, trying to decide whether walking through meant freedom or just a different kind of cage. The city lights blurred past. Dawn was coming, a new day, new choices. Celine closed her eyes and tried to imagine a future where she wasn't defined by Cassian Moretti. Tried and failed. Because some things, once they mark you forever. And the only question left was whether she'd spend the rest of her life running from that mark, or finally, terrifyingly, turning back to embrace it. The vehicle turned another corner, and somewhere in the darkness behind them, in an ambulance racing toward an unknown destination, Cassian Moretti held her dying mother's hand and drove toward the one place he'd sworn he'd never go. The one place where this story could finally, impossibly, end, or begin again. The ambulance didn't stop at Mount Sinai. Miller drove past the hospital entrance, past the emergency bay where federal agents waited with protective details and official protocols. He kept driving north while Cassian worked in the back, stabilizing Catherine with equipment he'd somehow procured during 3 years of planning for emergencies he hoped would never come. "Where are we going?" Miller asked, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "Somewhere they can't follow." Cassian's hands were steady despite the blood seeping through his shoulder wound. He'd tied it off with gauze, kept working. "There's a clinic 40 miles north, off the books, run by a doctor who owes me favors. They'll track the ambulance. Let them. By the time they figure out we're not heading to Mount Sinai, we'll be gone." Catherine's monitors showed improvement, heart rate stabilizing, blood pressure rising toward normal ranges. The antidote was working, pulling her back from whatever edge Vincent's poison had pushed her toward. But she was still unconscious, still fragile, and moving her at all was a risk Cassian was taking because staying meant federal custody for her and execution for him. Miller's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then at Cassian through the rear-view mirror. "They know. Adi just sent out an APB. Every cop within 100 miles is looking for this vehicle. Then we ditch it, take the next exit." They abandoned the ambulance in a rest stop parking lot, transferred Catherine to a van Miller had somehow arranged. Cassian carried her with the same careful gentleness he'd shown in the hospital, and Miller tried very hard not to think about how wrong this was, aiding a fugitive, disobeying direct orders, throwing away his career for a woman he barely knew and a criminal he should be arresting. But he'd seen Chen's betrayal, seen Vincent's cruelty. And something about Celine's desperation had reminded him why he'd joined the FBI in the first place, to protect people, not to play political games that got innocent women poisoned. So he drove. North, away from the city, into rural darkness where federal jurisdiction got fuzzy and people minded their own business. The clinic was a farmhouse that looked abandoned until you got close enough to see the generator humming behind it and the security cameras hidden in dead trees. An elderly man waited on the porch. Dr. Chen, no relation to the trader agent, who'd spent 40 years patching up people who couldn't go to hospitals for reasons they didn't discuss. "Cassian," the doctor said, no surprise in his voice. "Didn't think I'd see you again." "Neither did I. Can you help her?" Dr. Chen examined Catherine in silence, checking vitals, studying the readouts from portable monitors. Finally, he nodded. "Poison's nasty, but your antidote bought her time. She'll need intensive care for a few days, but she'll survive. Can you provide that care here?" "For how long?" "Until it's safe for her to surface. Could be weeks. Could be months." The doctor looked at Miller, then back at Cassian. "This is FBI business, isn't it?" "Was. Now it's just survival. I want payment up front. Double my usual rate plus hazard pay." Cassian pulled out a phone, made a transfer. Dr. Chen checked his account, saw 6 figures appear, and nodded once. "Get her inside." They settled Catherine in a room that looked like it belonged in a real hospital. Medical equipment, clean sheets, everything needed for recovery. Dr. Chen started an IV, adjusted medications, worked with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. "She'll sleep for another 12 hours minimum," he said. "When she wakes, she'll be weak but lucid. You'll need to explain what happened before she panics." "I'll be gone by then," Cassian said. Miller turned. "What?" "You heard me. I stay. I bring heat. Federal agents, Vincent's remaining people, everyone hunting me will converge here, and Catherine dies in the crossfire." Cassian pulled out a burner phone, typed something, then handed it to Miller. "When she wakes, give her this. It has instructions for reaching her daughter and accessing funds I've set aside for her care." "You're just leaving?" "I'm ensuring she survives. There's a difference." Cassian looked at Catherine's unconscious face. Peaceful now, color returning, the gray pallor of near-death fading. "Tell her—" He stopped. What could he possibly say? Tell her I'm sorry for poisoning her 3 years ago? Tell her I saved her tonight to atone? Tell her I loved her daughter enough to burn down everything I'd built? "Tell her Celine made the right choice," he said finally. "Testifying, leaving, all of it. Tell her she raised someone strong enough to survive me." Then he walked out before Miller could argue. Outside, dawn was breaking over fields that stretched toward a horizon Cassian couldn't see. He'd stolen Miller's van keys, taken a vehicle that would buy him maybe 6 hours before it was reported. 6 hours to disappear again, to find whatever hiding place came after this one. 3 years ago, running had felt like strategy. Tonight it just felt like exhaustion. He drove south, back toward the city he'd fled hours earlier. Stupid, probably. Suicidal, definitely. But there was something he needed to do before disappearing forever. The federal building where they'd taken Celine was guarded but not impenetrable. Cassian had spent 3 years studying security systems, learning to move through spaces designed to keep people like him out. He went in through the parking garage, bypassed cameras with equipment he'd been carrying since the hospital, and made it to the 3rd floor before encountering actual resistance. 2 agents in a corridor. Young, alert, hands near their weapons. Cassian raised his hands before they could draw. "I need to see Celine Vale," he said calmly. 5 minutes. That's all." "Sir, you need to leave." "I know I do. I will. But first, I need to see her. Tell her Cassian Moretti is here. See what she says." The agents exchanged glances. One spoke into his radio, low conversation Cassian couldn't hear. A long pause. Then the agent's eyes widened slightly. "She says let him in." They escorted him to a conference room, weapons drawn the entire way. Inside, Celine sat at a table with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched, and a look on her face that said she'd been expecting this. "Leave us," she told the agents. "Ma'am, protocol, 5 minutes. You can watch through the glass." She gestured to the observation window. "If he tries anything, shoot him, but give us 5 minutes." The agents left reluctantly. Through the glass, Cassian could see them taking positions, hands on weapons, ready to end him if he so much as leaned too close. You're insane, Celine said. Coming here. I know. They're going to arrest you the moment you step out of this room. I know that too. Then why? Cassian sat down across from her, close enough to see the exhaustion in her eyes and the way her hands trembled slightly around the coffee cup. She looked older than 3 years should account for. They both did. Your mother's alive, he said. Stable, being cared for by someone I trust. She'll make a full recovery. Relief flooded Celine's expression. Where? I can't tell you that, but Miller knows. He'll facilitate contact once it's safe. Cassian leaned back, feeling the weight of his shoulder wound and about 50 other injuries accumulated over 3 years of running. I came to say goodbye, and to tell you something you deserve to hear. If this is another confession about poisoning, no, it's... He struggled for words. 3 years ago, you asked me if I loved you or if I just wanted to own you. I told you both. I lied. It was always love, Celine, twisted and sick and born from obsession, but love nonetheless. Everything I did, the poison, the manipulation, all of it, came from a terrified boy who'd learned young that anything you don't control gets taken from you. That's not an excuse. I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just... His voice cracked. I'm trying to explain why I couldn't just let you go. Why even now, knowing you'll probably testify against me again, knowing this conversation is being recorded and will be used in court, I had to see you one more time. Celine's eyes were wet. You really are insane. Probably. He smiled, and it was the saddest thing she'd ever seen. But I'm your kind of insane. We matched, you and I, both desperate enough to do terrible things for the people we loved. The only difference is you were trying to save your mother. I was trying to own you. One of those is noble. The other is just sick. Yes, they sat in silence. Through the glass, agents watched with fingers on triggers. Somewhere in this building, prosecutors were probably preparing charges that would put Cassian away for multiple lifetimes. And somewhere 40 miles north, Catherine was waking up to a world where her daughter had saved her by bargaining with monsters. What happens now? Celine asked quietly. Celine, you tell them everything. Give them Vincent, give them whatever's left of the organization. You get your immunity, your fresh start, your mother back. Cassian stood slowly, hands visible, so the agents wouldn't shoot. And I disappear. For real this time. No more watching, no more protection from the shadows. You'll be free of me. Will I? She looked up at him. Or will I spend the rest of my life wondering if you're out there somewhere, planning your next move? I'm done moving. Tonight was the last play. I saved your mother. I made sure you'd survive. That's all I had left to give you. What about you? What do you have left? He laughed, bitter and broken. Nothing. I had an empire. Gone. I had family. Dead or scattered. I had you. He stopped. I had you, and I destroyed that by being exactly what you accused me of. A monster who couldn't love without devouring. Celine stood as well. They faced each other across 3 feet of space that might as well have been an ocean. I need you to promise me something, she said. Anything. Don't come back, don't watch, don't interfere. Whatever life I build after this, let me build it without looking over my shoulder. Her voice shook. Give me that at least. Let me be free. The request hit him like a physical blow. She was asking him to do the one thing he'd never been capable of, letting go completely. Okay, he said finally. I promise. You're lying. Probably. His smile was ghost of the charm he used to wield like a weapon. But I'll try. That's the best I can offer. She wanted to hate him, wanted to feel nothing but contempt for the man who'd poisoned her mother and manipulated her life and consumed 3 years of her existence. But standing there, seeing the genuine grief in his eyes, all she felt was tired. Goodbye, Cassian. Goodbye, Celine. He moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the handle, looked back once. For what it's worth, he said quietly, you were the best thing that ever happened to me, even if I was the worst thing that happened to you. Then he opened the door and walked into the hallway where federal agents were waiting with handcuffs and weapons and charges that would ensure he never saw daylight as a free man again. Celine watched through the glass as they took him down. Not violently, because Cassian didn't resist, He just raised his hands, let them cuff him, let them read him rights he probably had memorized. His eyes found hers through the glass one last time, and something passed between them that had no name but felt like understanding. Then they led him away, and he was gone. Celine sat down hard in the conference chair and finally, fully, let herself cry. Not for Cassian. He'd made his choices and would live with the consequences. But for the girl she'd been 3 years ago, scrubbing blood off marble floors and believing she could save her mother without losing herself. That girl was gone, replaced by someone harder, sharper, capable of things that would have horrified her younger self. Someone who'd learned to survive in the darkness and wasn't entirely sure she knew how to live in the light anymore. The door opened. The assistant director entered, expression carefully neutral. "He's in custody," the AD said. "Maximum security holding until trial. He won't escape this time." "Good. We need you to make a formal statement. Everything that happened tonight, everything you know about Vincent's operation and Chen's involvement." "I will. But first, I need to see my mother." "Agent Miller's gone missing. He disabled his GPS, dumped his phone completely off grid." The AD's gaze was sharp. "You wouldn't happen to know where he went?" Celine met his eyes steadily. "No, but if he's smart, he's somewhere your jurisdiction doesn't reach." "That's aiding and abetting. That's speculation. Do you have proof I know Miller's location?" The AD studied her for a long moment. "You've changed. 3 years ago you were terrified. Now you sound like one of them." "One of who?" "The criminals you used to fear." He sat down across from her. "Be careful, Miss Vale. The line between survivor and predator is thinner than you think." Maybe he was right. Maybe 3 years of running and hiding and compromising had eroded something essential. Or maybe it had just revealed what was always there, a capacity for ruthlessness that circumstances had forced into bloom. "I survived," Celine said quietly. "That's all that matters." "Is it?" The AD pulled out a folder, opened it to show photos. Vincent in handcuffs, Chen being led out in restraints, various members of what remained of the Moretti organization, all arrested in coordinated raids that had happened while Celine was saying goodbye to Cassian. "We got them, all of them. Vincent, Chen, the lieutenants, the accountants, everyone you identified in your initial testimony, plus the new information you provided tonight. It's over. The organization is finished. What about the people they hurt? The families destroyed, the lives ruined? Some things can't be fixed, just ended." He closed the folder. "You did good work tonight, Miss Vale. Dangerous, reckless, completely against protocol, but effective. We'd like to offer you a position. Consultant at first, maybe full agent eventually. Your unique perspective could—" "No. No? I'm done with this world. All of it. The criminals, the FBI, the endless cycle of violence and retaliation. I just want to be normal again." "You'll never be normal. Not after what you've seen, what you've done." He was probably right about that too, but Celine was tired of being right about dark things. "Then I'll be quiet," she said, "and that's close enough." The formal statement took 6 hours. Celine recounted everything: the hospital break-in, the confrontation with Vincent and Chen, Cassian's arrival, and subsequent escape with her mother. She gave the Miller's route as far as she knew it, which was deliberately vague. Confirmed that her mother was alive and receiving care, but claimed ignorance about the specific location. They didn't believe her, but they couldn't prove she was lying. By noon, she was done, released into protective custody that felt less like protection and more like monitoring. They set her up in a safe house, different from the previous ones, nicer, with windows she could actually open. A handler checked in twice daily, bringing groceries and news from the outside world. Vincent was formally charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, corruption of federal agents, and about 40 other counts. His trial would take years, but the case was solid. He'd die in prison. Chen was cooperating, giving up names and operations in exchange for a lighter sentence. She'd still do significant time, but she'd see daylight again eventually. And Cassian was being held without bail in a facility designed for the most dangerous criminals. His trial was scheduled to begin in 6 months, charges so numerous they filled 23 pages of legal documents. The prosecution was calling it the trial of the decade. Celine tried not to think about him, tried to focus on rebuilding, on planning for when she could finally see her mother again. But late at night, alone in the safe house, she'd lie awake remembering the look in his eyes when he'd said goodbye. the genuine grief there. The resignation of a man who knew he'd lost everything that mattered. She told herself she didn't care, told herself he deserved whatever happened to him. The lies were getting easier. 2 weeks after the hospital incident, Celine's handler arrived with news. Your mother's been cleared for contact. Video call only for now, but it's a start. They set up a secure connection in the safe house. Celine sat in front of the laptop with her heart hammering, not sure what she'd say, how she'd explain the past 3 years of lies and danger and compromises. The screen flickered. Catherine appeared, looking thin but healthy, sitting in a comfortable room that could have been anywhere. Her eyes filled with tears the moment she saw Celine. "Baby," Catherine breathed. "Oh my God, baby, I thought... When I woke up and they told me what happened, I'm okay, Mom. We're both okay. They said you saved my life, that you traded your freedom to..." Catherine couldn't finish, too choked with emotion. "I did what I had to do, same as always. By working with that man, the one who poisoned me before." Catherine's expression hardened slightly. "They told me everything, about Cassian Moretti, about what he did 3 years ago and what he did 2 weeks ago, how he saved me to save you. It's complicated. It's insane." Catherine leaned closer to the camera. "Celine, tell me you don't have feelings for him." The question hung in the digital space between them. Celine wanted to lie, wanted to give her mother the comfort of believing her daughter had escaped unscathed. But she was so tired of lying. "I don't know what I feel," she admitted. "He's a monster who destroyed my life. But he's also the reason you're alive right now, both times. I can hate him for the poison and be grateful for the antidote, and those things don't cancel each other out. They just exist together." Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "You sound different. Harder." "I am harder. Had to be. I'm sorry for all of it. If I hadn't gotten sick..." "Don't." Celine's voice cracked. "Don't apologize for being sick. That wasn't your fault. None of this was your fault. It was his, and I'm the one who chose to deal with a devil to save you. I'd make the same choice again. Even knowing what it cost you? Even then." They talked for an hour. Catherine described her recovery, the quiet farmhouse where she was staying, the doctor who wouldn't tell her his name but brought her flowers from his garden. Celine talked about the safe house, the upcoming trials, the slow process of building something like a normal life from the wreckage. Neither of them mentioned Cassian again, but he was present in every pause, every careful word. The ghost at the table, the monster in the room, the man who'd poisoned and saved and loved and destroyed in equal measure. When the call ended, Celine sat staring at the blank screen and tried to imagine a future where she didn't think about him daily. Tried and failed. The next 3 months passed in a blur of testimony, prep, depositions, and slowly expanding freedom. Celine was allowed to leave the safe house with supervision, then without. Allowed to look for work, for an apartment, for some semblance of normal existence. She found a job at a bookstore in a neighborhood where no one knew her face, rented a studio apartment above a bakery that smelled like fresh bread every morning, went to therapy twice a week and lied about feeling better. Catherine was transferred to a facility closer to the city, still under protection but with more freedom. They had dinner together once a week, carefully supervised visits where they talked about everything except the elephant in the room. Vincent's trial concluded. Guilty on all counts. Life in prison without possibility of parole. The organization he'd tried to rebuild crumbled completely, scattered to the winds. Chen got 15 years. She'd be out in 10 with good behavior, but her career was finished, her reputation destroyed. Sometimes justice looked like that. Imperfect, incomplete, but better than nothing. And Cassian's trial approached like a storm on the horizon. Celine was subpoenaed to testify. Not about the night at the hospital, they had enough witnesses for that, but about the original organization. The crimes from 3 years ago. The empire Cassian had built and she'd helped destroy. She tried to refuse, claimed trauma, inability to face him in court, anything that might get her out of it. But the subpoena was ironclad, and eventually she ran out of excuses. The trial began on a Tuesday in October, 3.5 years after Celine had first scrubbed blood off a marble floor. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, curious citizens, people who wanted to see the great Cassian Moretti finally face justice. He sat at the defense table in a suit that probably cost more than Celine's monthly rent, looking calm and composed despite the charges that would keep him imprisoned for the rest of his life. When Celine entered to take the stand, his eyes found hers immediately. No smile, no acknowledgement, just that steady silver gaze that had always seen too much. She was sworn in, sat down, faced a prosecutor who'd spent months preparing to use her testimony as a weapon. Miss Vale, can you describe your relationship with the defendant? Where did she even start? The manipulation, the contracts, the twisted love that had consumed them both? He employed me, Celine said carefully. I worked for his organization in an administrative capacity. For how long? 6 months. And during that time, did you witness criminal activity? Yes. Can you describe what you witnessed? She could. She did. For 3 hours, Celine recounted crimes and corruption, named names and detailed operations. The prosecutor was pleased. The defense attorneys looked grim, and Cassian just sat there, watching her destroy him with the same calm he'd shown that first night. During a recess, Celine stepped into the hallway for air, found Cassian's lead defense attorney waiting. Miss Vale, a word? She wanted to refuse, but curiosity won out. What? My client wants you to know he's not contesting any of your testimony. Whatever you say on that stand, he'll corroborate. He's pleading guilty to all charges. Celine's stomach dropped. Why? Because fighting would mean dragging you through months more of this. Cross-examination, character assassination, everything we could throw at you to discredit your testimony. He won't do that to you, so he's ending it. That's insane, suicidal, exactly like him. He'll die in prison. Yes, but you'll be free. That's the trade he's making. The attorney's expression was unreadable. He asked me to tell you one more thing, that his promise still stands. After today, he's done. No more interference, no more protection, no more watching. You get the freedom you asked for. The attorney walked away, leaving Celine standing in the hallway with her heart in pieces. When testimony resumed, the prosecutor finished his questions. The defense declined to cross-examine. Celine was dismissed with thanks from the judge and sick relief from her own chest. She stood to leave, had to pass the defense table to reach the exit. As she did, Cassian looked up. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything. She should have ignored him, should have walked past without acknowledgement. Instead, she stopped. You're pleading guilty. Yes. You'll never get out. I know. Why? His smile was sad and somehow peaceful. Because I finally figured out how to love you without destroying you. I let you go, completely, forever. He glanced at the guards waiting to escort him back to holding. Took me long enough, but I got there eventually. Celine wanted to say something, wanted to tell him he was an idiot, that pleading guilty was martyrdom, not atonement, that she didn't need his sacrifice. But the words stuck in her throat, tangled with too many other feelings to name. Goodbye, Cassian, she managed finally. Goodbye, Celine. She walked out of the courtroom and didn't look back. The trial concluded 2 days later. Cassian pled guilty to 47 counts of various crimes, was sentenced to multiple consecutive life terms, and was transferred to a maximum security prison where he'd spend the rest of his existence in a cage. The media called it justice served. The FBI called it a successful prosecution. Catherine called it overdue. Celine called it the end of a chapter she'd been trying to close for 3.5 years. Life continued. She kept working at the bookstore, kept seeing her mother for carefully supervised dinners, kept going to therapy and pretending to heal. Months passed, then a year, then 2. Her mother's health remained stable. The cancer never returned. Dr. Chen had been right. Cassian's original poison had a reversible component. Once Catherine stopped being exposed, her body healed itself. She'd likely live for decades, never knowing how close she'd come to death multiple times. Celine dated occasionally. Nice men with normal jobs who didn't know about her past. It never went anywhere. How could it? How do you explain to someone that you'd once loved a monster, that part of you still did, that normal relationships felt colorless compared to the twisted intensity of what she'd survived? She didn't. She just smiled and made excuses and stayed alone. 5 years after Cassian's imprisonment, Celine received a letter. Prison postmark, familiar handwriting that made her hands shake. She almost threw it away unread. Almost. But curiosity was a powerful thing, and she'd spent 5 years wondering if he'd keep his promise about leaving her alone. Apparently not. The letter was short. Celine, I know I promised not to contact you. I'm breaking that promise once, and then never again. Your mother's cancer wasn't the only poison I administered. I need you to know, I poisoned myself too. Slow acting, designed to manifest years later. By the time you read this, I'll be dead. It'll look like natural causes. No one will question it. I wanted you to know the truth, not for forgiveness, just for honesty. You deserve better than what I gave you. Better than the manipulation, the obsession, the consuming need that I mistook for love. You deserve someone who could love you without destroying you, and I was never going to be that person. So I'm removing myself. Permanently. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. I hope you find happiness. I hope you build a life that doesn't include shadows or nightmares or men who love like weapons. I hope you forget me eventually. But if you don't, if some part of you remembers what we were, know that it was real. Twisted and toxic, but real. And in my own broken way, I loved you until my last breath, Cassian. The letter slipped from her fingers. She called the prison immediately, demanded information. They confirmed it. Cassian Moretti had died 3 days ago. Heart failure, the doctors said. Not uncommon in men his age under the stress of incarceration. Natural causes. No investigation needed. Natural causes. Just like her mother's cancer had seemed natural before Celine learned the truth. He'd poisoned himself. Years ago, probably around the time of his arrest. Set a timer on his own death and walked into prison knowing he'd never walk out alive. The ultimate control move, the final manipulation. Cassian Moretti deciding when and how he'd die because that was the one thing no one else could take from him. Celine didn't cry. She'd cried herself dry years ago. She just sat with the letter and tried to process this last revelation in a long series of them. He was gone. Actually, permanently, irreversibly gone. The monster who'd ruined her life and saved it in equal measure. The man who'd loved her enough to die rather than risk hurting her again. She should feel relief. Instead, she felt empty. The funeral was small, just his lawyer, a few distant relatives who barely knew him, and Celine. She stood at the back, watching them lower a coffin into ground that seemed too ordinary for someone who'd burned so bright and so terrible. When everyone else left, she approached the grave. Stood there staring at fresh-turned earth and a headstone that listed only his name and dates. No epitaph. Nothing to indicate who he'd been or what he'd done. Maybe that was fitting. How do you summarize someone like Cassian Moretti? Criminal, monster. The man who'd poisoned her mother and saved her life? The man who'd owned Celine completely and loved her destructively and ultimately sacrificed himself rather than continue hurting her? There were no words that captured all of that. You were right, Celine said quietly to the grave. It was real. Everything we were, as twisted as it was real. She swallowed hard. And I hate you for that, for making me love someone I should have run from, for showing me a kind of intensity I'll never find again and then taking it away, for poisoning yourself rather than just staying alive and letting me forget you. The grave didn't answer. Dead men couldn't. I hope you found whatever peace you were looking for, she continued. I hope the poison was quick. I hope... Her voice broke. I hope wherever you are now, you finally learned how to love without destroying. She stayed until the sun started setting, then walked away. Behind her, the grave remained, a period on a story that had been written in blood and manipulation and twisted devotion. At home, Celine pulled out a box from the back of her closet. Inside was the engagement ring Cassian had offered 5 years ago, the one that had rolled under her dresser during the federal raid. She'd kept it all these years, unable to throw it away, unable to wear it. A physical reminder of a promise that was never fulfilled. She looked at it for a long time. Then she put it on, not as an engagement ring, not as a symbol of what they'd been, but as a reminder of what she'd survived, of the girl who'd scrubbed blood off marble floors and became someone hard enough to love a monster and strong enough to walk away. The ring felt heavy on her finger, foreign, wrong in all the ways it should feel wrong, but she left it on. That evening, she had dinner with her mother. Catherine looked healthy, vibrant, fully recovered from cancers that had been manufactured and antidotes that had been withheld and cured. She was 60 now, gray-haired and laughing, building a life in a small town where no one knew about Moretti empires or federal raids. "You're quiet tonight," Catherine observed. "Just thinking." "About?" Celine touched the ring on her finger. Her mother's eyes followed the gesture, widened slightly. "He's dead," Celine said. "Cassian. He died 3 days ago." Catherine set down her fork. "How do you feel?" "I don't know. Empty. Relieved. Sad. All of it at once." "That's allowed. He was—" Catherine struggled for words. "He was terrible to us. But he also saved us. People are complicated, especially people like him." "Do you think we're free now? Really free?" "From him? Yes. From what he represented? From the choices we made to survive him?" Catherine reached across the table, squeezed her daughter's hand. "I don't know if we ever get free of that, but we can move forward, build something new from what's left. Moving forward, building something new." It sounded simple when Catherine said it like that. After dinner, Celine walked through the city where everything had started, past the estate that had been sold off, carved into expensive condos for people who didn't know about the blood soaked into its foundations, past the hospital where her mother had nearly died twice, past the federal building where she'd testified and saved herself by destroying everything else. The city looked different now, cleaner somehow. Or maybe she was just seeing it through different eyes, the eyes of someone who'd walked through darkness and emerged scarred, but alive. Her phone buzzed. Miller's number. She'd stayed in contact with him over the years, the way you stayed in contact with people who'd saved your life in hospital loading docks. "Did you hear?" he asked without preamble. "About Cassian?" "Yes. He left something for you. His lawyer contacted me. Instructions to deliver it after his death." Celine's chest tightened. "What is it?" "I don't know. Sealed package. Says I'm supposed to bring it to you in person. Can I come by tomorrow?" "Sure." She spent that night unable to sleep, wondering what last message Cassian had left behind. What final manipulation or apology or confession waited in whatever package Miller was bringing. When Miller arrived the next morning, he looked older than she remembered. 5 years in the FBI had weathered him, or maybe it was just the weight of keeping secrets for people he shouldn't have protected. "How are you?" she asked. "Alive." "That's something." He pulled out an envelope, official and sealed with wax like something from another century. He gave this to his lawyer 4 years ago. Instructions not to open it, just deliver it to you upon his death. Celine took the envelope with trembling hands. "Do you know what's inside?" "No, and I don't want to. Some things are between you and—" He gestured vaguely. "Whatever you two were to each other." After Miller left, Celine sat with the envelope for an hour before opening it. Inside was a single key and a handwritten note in Cassian's precise script. "There's a storage unit in Brooklyn, number 847. This key opens it. Inside you'll find everything I couldn't say while alive. Not apologies, I was never good at those. Just evidence of who I was before the poison, before the empire, before I became the monster who destroyed us both. You don't have to look, you don't have to care. But if some part of you still wonders who I might have been in a different life, it's there, waiting, like I always was. Cassian." The storage unit was in a part of Brooklyn that gentrification hadn't reached yet. Industrial, gray, the kind of place where people stored things they wanted to forget about. Celine stood outside Unit 847 for 10 minutes before using the key. Inside was smaller than she expected, maybe 10 by 10 feet, filled with boxes stacked neatly against walls. She opened the first one, found photo albums. Cassian as a child, smiling, normal, nothing in his eyes that suggested the man he'd become. Family photos with people who looked happy, or at least content. A different life before. Before what? Before whatever turned him into the man who'd poisoned her mother? The second box held journals. Years of them, starting when Cassian was 16. She opened one at random, read an entry about a girl he liked in high school, about algebra homework and college applications, and all the normal concerns of a normal teenager. The entries got darker as she paged forward. His father's death, murdered by a rival family. His mother's grief, the responsibility of taking over an empire he'd never wanted. The slow transformation from boy to criminal, narrated in his own hand with heartbreaking clarity. I'm becoming something I don't recognize, one entry read. Every decision I make for survival takes me further from who I thought I'd be. But what choice do I have? Walk away, and the empire crumbles. My family dies. Everyone who depends on me suffers. So I stay. I harden. I become the monster this world requires. And every day I feel more pieces of the boy I was dying off. Soon there won't be anything left but the role. Celine read through years of journals, watching Cassian disappear into the character he'd created. Watched him justify increasingly terrible choices. Watched him rationalize violence as necessity, manipulation as strategy, cruelty as self-preservation. And then she found the entry from 6 years ago, the one that changed everything. I saw her today, just a girl at a coffee shop, nothing special at first glance. But she smiled at the barista who got her order wrong, made some joke that diffused the tension, and I couldn't look away. She had this lightness about her, like she still believed the world could be good if you were kind enough. I wanted that, wanted to possess it, to own someone who hadn't been destroyed yet, so I followed her home. Learned her name, Celine. I'm going to make her mine, whatever it takes. The entry detailed his plan, the poison, the job offer, the contracts. Everything plotted months in advance with the cold precision of a man who'd stopped seeing people as people and started seeing them as pieces in a game. Celine set down the journal with shaking hands. This was it. This was the moment Cassian had stopped being human and started being the monster who'd destroyed her life. And he documented it, preserved it, left it for her to find so she'd understand exactly how premeditated everything had been. She should burn it all. Burn the journals and photos and evidence of the boy he'd been. Let him be remembered only as the monster. But she couldn't, because somewhere in these boxes was the answer to the question that had haunted her for 5 years. Was the love real or just another manipulation? She kept reading. Through journals that chronicled their relationship from his perspective, the genuine surprise when she came back to clean the room 3 times, the growing fascination as he learned about her mother's illness, the moment he realized his plan to own her was turning into something more dangerous, actual feeling. She terrifies me, one entry read. Not because she could destroy me, though she could, easily, but because she makes me want to be better, want to be the kind of man who deserves someone like her. But I'm not. I'm poison in human form, and everything I touch dies. The right thing would be to let her go. The selfish thing is to keep her anyway. I'm going to choose selfish. I always do. Later entries got more conflicted, after Marco's death, after the raids, after everything crumbled. She testified against me and I can't even blame her. I took everything from her, her safety, her innocence, her choices. All I gave back was her mother's life, and a twisted version of love that probably shouldn't be called love at all. She was right to walk away, right to save herself. I hope she forgets me. I hope she builds something beautiful from the wreckage I left behind. I hope she never realizes that letting her go is killing me more slowly than any poison ever could. The final journal ended 3 days before his arrest. The last entry was short. Tomorrow I turn myself in. I could run further, hide better, but what's the point? Celine testified. The organization is finished. Everyone I loved is dead or scattered. I have nothing left except the certainty that I destroyed the one good thing that ever happened to me. There's a kind of poetry in that. The monster finally getting what he deserved. I poisoned myself years ago, literally, not metaphorically. Set it to trigger after enough time passed. By the time anyone reads this, I'll be dead. Maybe that's better. Maybe dead men can't hurt the people they love. I hope Celine finds someone better. Someone who knows how to love without destroying. Someone who can give her the peace I only ever took away. I hope she's happy. That's all I have left to hope for. Celine closed the journal and sat in the storage unit, surrounded by evidence of a man who'd been both monster and victim, destroyer and destroyed. Cassian had been terrible, had poisoned and manipulated and consumed her life, but he'd also loved her in the only way he knew how, destructively, possessively, and ultimately fatally. She couldn't forgive him. Some things were unforgivable, but she could understand him now in a way she never had before, could see the scared boy underneath the empire, could recognize the tragedy of someone who'd been broken by the world and then broken everyone else in turn. It didn't excuse anything. But it explained everything. Celine left the storage unit with one journal, the last one. Burned the rest in a barrel outside because some truths didn't need to survive. Some stories were better left incomplete. At home, she placed the journal on her bookshelf between volumes of poetry and fiction, a reminder that people were complicated, that love could be real and poisonous simultaneously, that survival sometimes meant accepting that you'd never fully understand what you'd been through. 6 months later, Celine met someone, a professor at the local college, kind and patient and nothing like Cassian. They dated slowly, carefully, and he never pushed for more than she was willing to give. She told him she'd been in a bad relationship before, left out the parts about federal raids and poisoned mothers and men who loved like weapons. He asked about the ring she sometimes wore, the diamond that was too expensive for a bookstore employee's salary. She told him it was from someone who'd loved her badly. He accepted that and didn't press for details. They moved in together after a year, got married after 2. It was quiet and peaceful and safe, all the things her relationship with Cassian had never been. She built a life that included Sunday dinners with her mother, holidays with his family, a garden she tended with patience learned from survival. She was happy. Mostly. On good days, completely. On bad days, she'd touch the ring in her jewelry box and remember what it felt like to be consumed by someone. To love and be loved with intensity that burned away everything else. It had been terrible, destructive, unsustainable, but it had been real. Her new husband never asked about the ring again. He was smart enough to recognize that some parts of her past belonged to ghosts he couldn't compete with. 20 years passed, then 30. Celine grew older, grayer, watched her mother age into her 80s with the graceful decline of someone whose life had been extended by poison and antidote both. They never talked about Cassian directly, but he lived in the spaces between their words. The ghost at every family dinner, the shadow that made every good moment feel fragile because they knew how quickly things could be taken away. When Catherine died at 87, peacefully in her sleep, Celine stood at her grave and felt a complicated mix of grief and relief. Her mother had survived, had outlived the poison, the cancer, all of it, had built 40 years of life from the wreckage of those terrible months. That was victory, wasn't it? Survival measured in decades instead of days? At the funeral, someone approached Celine who she didn't recognize. An elderly man, maybe 70, with kind eyes that looked familiar somehow. "You don't know me," he said quietly. "But I knew Cassian. Before everything." Celine's heart clenched. She hadn't heard his name spoken aloud in years. "We grew up together," the man continued, "before his father died, before he became—" a gesture that encompassed the weight of what Cassian had been. "He asked me to deliver something if I ever met you. Said you'd know when the time was right." He handed her a small box, worn leather, old enough to be an heirloom. "What is it?" "I don't know. He gave it to me 40 years ago, made me promise to find you someday." The man smiled sadly. "I'm sorry it took so long, but I heard about your mother's passing, and I thought—" He shrugged. "Seemed like the right time." He left before she could ask more questions. Inside the box was a letter, the paper yellowed with age, the ink faded but legible, and a photograph. The photo showed 2 boys, maybe 16, smiling at the camera with their arms around each other's shoulders. One of them was unmistakably Cassian, younger and softer, without the hardness that would come later. The letter was dated 2 weeks before his death. "Celine, if you're reading this, it means enough time has passed that my friend finally found you. I wrote this knowing I'd be dead before you saw it, knowing that whatever happened between us would be distant enough that maybe you could read it without anger. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just understanding. The boy in this photo is who I was before everything went wrong, before I became the monster who hurt you. I want you to know he existed, that for a little while, I was someone who believed in good things, someone who might have loved you without destroying you if we'd met in different circumstances. We didn't. I became what I became, and you survived what you survived. But maybe, in whatever comes after this, maybe that boy and a version of you who never had to scrub blood off marble floors are meeting for the first time. Maybe in some other life, we get it right. That's not redemption. It's just hope. The only kind I have left. I'm sorry. For all of it. For the poison and the pain and the twisted love that broke us both. I'm sorry I couldn't be better. I'm sorry you had to be stronger. I'm sorry our story ended the way it did instead of the way it could have. But I'm not sorry I met you. Even knowing how it would end, I'd make the same choice. Because loving you, even badly, even destructively, was the most human thing I ever did. Goodbye, Celine. In this life and whatever comes next. Cassian. Celine stood in the cemetery with the letter and photo in her hands, crying for the first time in decades. Not for the monster who'd poisoned her mother or the criminal who'd built an empire on suffering, but for the boy in the photograph, the one who'd had potential before the world broke him, the one who might have been good in different circumstances. She'd spent 30 years hating Cassian Moretti. Maybe it was time to let that go. Not forgive, never forgive, but release. Let the ghost finally rest instead of carrying him through every good moment, every peaceful day, every time she felt happy, and immediately guilty for feeling happy. He was gone, had been gone for decades. And she'd survived, built a life, found something like peace. That was enough. Celine buried the letter and photo with her mother. Let them rest together. The woman who'd survived poison and the memory of the man who'd administered it and later cured it. Complicated legacies for complicated people. At home, she finally took off the ring she'd worn on and off for 30 years, placed it in the box with Cassian's final journal, closed the lid and put it in the back of her closet where it belonged. A piece of history, not a piece of her present. Her husband found her crying in their bedroom and held her without asking why. He was good like that, patient, understanding, everything Cassian had never been. I'm okay, Celine told him, just processing. Your mother? My mother, and everything else. He kissed her forehead. Take your time. She did. Took days, then weeks, then months to work through the grief of losing her mother and the strange relief of finally, fully letting go of the ghost who'd haunted her for decades. It got easier. Slowly, incrementally, the way healing always happened, too gradual to notice day by day, but obvious when you looked back over years. Celine Vale, or Sarah Mitchell, or whatever name she'd been using, built a life that had nothing to do with monsters or empires or blood on marble floors. She tended her garden. She loved her husband. She worked at her bookstore and recommended novels to customers who never knew about the violence in her past. She survived. And in the end, survival was its own kind of victory. Years later, when she was old and gray and closer to the end than the beginning, someone asked her if she had any regrets. One, she said. I regret not running the first night, before the contracts, before everything. She paused. But if I had, my mother would have died. So maybe that's not really a regret. Maybe it's just the price of loving someone enough to deal with devils. Would you do it again? She thought about marble floors and federal raids and 3 years of running. Thought about the man who'd poisoned her mother and saved her life. Thought about the girl she'd been and the woman she'd become. Yes, she said finally. I'd do it all again. Not because it was right, just because it was necessary. And sometimes that's all we get. Necessary choices, not good ones. That was the truth she'd learned in those terrible months. That survival wasn't about being good or pure or morally correct. It was about doing what needed to be done and living with the consequences. She'd done terrible things to save someone she loved. Cassian had done terrible things to possess someone he loved. The difference between them was intent, maybe, or scale, but both had been willing to burn the world for one person. That was human nature, ugly and beautiful and impossible to judge from outside. Celine died at 78, peacefully, surrounded by family who never knew about the darkness in her past. At her funeral, they talked about her kindness, her patience, the way she'd built a good life from difficult beginnings. No one mentioned Cassian Moretti. No one mentioned federal raids or poisoned mothers or the 3 years she'd spent becoming someone hard enough to survive a monster's love. Those stories died with her, and maybe that was how it should be. Some truths were too complicated to explain to people who'd never walked through darkness. Some stories only made sense to the people who'd lived them. In the end, Celine Vale had survived, had built something good from wreckage, had loved and been loved, badly, destructively, but genuinely. That was enough. That was everything. And in whatever comes after this life, if anything comes, Maybe there's a version of her meeting a version of Cassian before the poison and the pain. Maybe they get it right. Maybe they build something that doesn't require blood on marble floors and federal raids to reach its conclusion. Or maybe not. Maybe some loves are meant to burn bright and terrible and brief, leaving scars that teach you how to recognize gentleness when it finally arrives. Either way, the story was finished. The monster was dead. The girl who survived him was at peace. And somewhere between those two truths lived a complicated, messy, human story about the prices we pay for love and the question of whether survival is worth what it costs. The answer, Celine had learned, was always yes. Even when it hurt. Even when it destroyed. Even when it left you fundamentally changed from who you'd been before. Survival was worth it. Because what other choice was there?